The World Order: A Study in the Hegemony of Parasitism by Eustace Mullins. Chapter 1. The Rothschilds. In its issue of December 19, 1983, Forbes magazine noted that half of Germany's top 10 banks are Frankfurt-based. The modern world's financial system, an updating of the Babylonian monetary system of taxes and money creation, was perfected in Frankfurt on Main, in the province of Hesse. Mayor Amschel Bauer, later Rothschild, discovered that although loans to farmers and small businesses could be profitable, the real profits lay in making loans to governments. Born in Frankfurt in 1743, Mayor Amschel married Gutta Schnapper. He served a 3-year apprenticeship in Hanover at the Bank of Oppenheim. During this period, he had occasion to be of service to Lieutenant General Baron von Estorff. Von Estorff was the principal advisor to Landgrave Frederick II of Hesse, the wealthiest man in Europe. Frederick was worth from 70 to 100 million florins, much of it inherited from his father, Wilhelm VIII, brother of the King of Sweden. Baron von Estorff advised the Landgrave that Mayor Amschel showed an uncanny ability to increase money through his investments. The Landgrave immediately sent for him. At this time, King George III was trying to put down the American rebellion. His troops were being outfought by the hardy Americans, who were accustomed to wilderness battles. Mayor Amschel arranged for King George to hire 16,800 sturdy young Hessian soldiers from the Landgrave, a considerable addition to the Hesse's fortune. This advantageous relationship came to a halt with the sudden death in 1785 of the Landgrave, who was only 25 years old. However, Mayor Amschel attained absolute influence over his successor, Elector Wilhelm I, who, like Mayor Amschel, had also been born in 1743. It was said that they were like two shoes, so well did they go together. It was a pleasant change from Mayor Amschel's relationship with the former Landgrave, who had been a very difficult and demanding person. In fact, the Landgrave's sudden death had luckily placed Mayor Amschel in charge of the largest fortune in Europe. As he prospered, Mayor Amschel placed a large red shield over his door of the house in the Judengasse, which he shared with the Schiff family. He took the name Rothschild from his sign. In 1812, when he died, he left 1 billion francs to his 5 sons. The eldest, Anselm, was placed in charge of the Frankfurt Bank. He had no children, and the bank was later closed. The second son, Salomon, was sent to Vienna, where he soon took over the banking monopoly formerly shared among 5 Jewish families: Arnstein, Eskels, Gemuller, Stein, and Sina. The third son, Nathan, founded the London branch, after he had profited in some Manchester dealings in textiles and dyestuffs, which caused him to be widely feared and hated. Karl, the fourth son, went to Naples, where he became head of the occult group, the Alta Vendita. The youngest son, James, founded the French branch of the House of Rothschild in Paris. Thus strategically located, the 5 sons began their lucrative operations in government finance. Today, their holdings are concentrated in the 5 Arrows Fund of Curaçao and the 5 Arrows Corporation, Toronto, Canada. The name is taken from the Rothschild sign of an eagle with 5 arrows clutched in its talons, signifying the 5 sons. The first precept of success in making government loans lies in creating a demand, that is, by taking part in the creation of financial panics, depressions, famines, wars, and revolutions. The overwhelming success of the Rothschilds lay in their willingness to do what had to be done. As Frederick Morton writes in the preface to The Rothschilds, for the last 150 years, the history of the House of Rothschild has been to an amazing degree the backstage history of Western Europe. Because of their success in making loans not to individuals, but to nations, they reaped huge profits. Someone once said that the wealth of Rothschild consists of the bankruptcy of nations. In The Empire of the City, E.C. Nuth says, the fact that the House of Rothschild made its money in the great crashes of history and the great wars of history, the very periods when others lost their money, is beyond question. July 8, 1937, the New York Times noted that Professor Wilhelm, a German historian, had said, "The Rothschilds introduced the rule of money into European politics. The Rothschilds were the servants of money who undertook to reconstruct the world as an image of money and its functions. Money and the employment of wealth have become the law of European life. We no longer have nations, but economic provinces." June 4, 1879, the New York Times noted Baron Lionel N., de Rothschild, head of the world-famous banking house of Messrs. Rothschild and Company, died at the age of 71. He was son of the late Baron N.M. Rothschild, who founded the house in 1808 and died in 1836. His father came to the conclusion that in order to perpetuate the fame and power of the Rothschilds, which had already become worldwide, it was necessary that the family be kept together and devoted to the common cause. In order to do this, he proposed that they should intermarry and form no marital unions outside the family. A council of the heads of the houses was called at Frankfurt in 1826, and the views of Baron Nathan were approved. In The Rothschilds, the financial rulers of nations, John Reeves writes, "The first occasion in which Nathan assisted the English government was in 1819, when he undertook the loan of $60 million. From 1818 to 1832, Nathan issued 8 other loans totaling $165 million. He subsequently issued 18 government loans totaling $300 million. To the Rothschilds, nothing could have occurred more propitiously than the outbreak of the American Revolt and the French Revolution, as the two enabled them to lay the foundation of the immense wealth they have since acquired. The House of Rothschild was, and is, the ruling power in Europe, for all the political powers were willing to acknowledge the sway of the great financial despot, and, like obedient vassals, pay their tribute without murmur. Its influence was so all-powerful that it was a saying, no war could be undertaken without the assistance of the Rothschilds. They rose to a position of such power in the political and commercial world that they became the dictators of Europe. To the public, the archives of the family, which could throw so much light upon history, are a profound secret, a sealed book kept well hidden. On July 27, 1844, Maecenas said, Rothschild could be king of France if he so desired. The Jewish Encyclopedia noted, 1909 edition, in the year 1848 the Paris house of Rothschild was reckoned to be worth 600 million francs as against 300 million francs held by all the other Paris bankers. Professor Werner Sombart wrote, the principal loan floaters of the world, the Rothschilds, were later the first railway kings. The period of 1820 onwards became the age of the Rothschilds, so that at the middle of the century it was a common dictum. There is only one power in Europe, and that is Rothschild. Jews and modern capitalism. Hearst's Chicago Evening American commented, December 3, 1923, the Rothschilds can start or prevent wars. Their word could make or break empires. Reeves notes, the fall of Napoleon was the rise of Rothschild. Napoleon was later slowly poisoned to death with arsenic by a Rothschild agent. They had no need of another return from exile. The New York Evening Post noted July 22, 1924, the Kaiser had to consult Rothschild to find out whether he could declare war. Another Rothschild carried out the whole burden of the conflict which overthrew Napoleon. The Kaiser's chancellor, Bethmann Hollweg, who actually precipitated World War I, was a member of the Frankfurt banking family, Bethmann, and a cousin of the Rothschilds. After the fall of Napoleon, Salomon persuaded the ruler of Austria to issue patents of nobility to the 5 brothers. The Congress of Vienna was the emergence of the moth from its cocoon. The diktat of this Congress was a simple one. The aristocracies of Europe must submit to our will, or they are doomed. The death sentence upon the noble lines of Europe was pronounced by those who had the will to carry out their edict. It took another century to perfect the work, not because the killers were weak, but because they wished to proceed cautiously, without revealing their full strength. In combat, the decisive weapon is the one your opponent does not know about. It was not necessary to pronounce a death sentence upon the ruling families of America, because there were none. During the 19th century, a few descendants of colonial entrepreneurs had amassed wealth and could afford a life of leisure and travel. They remained slavishly dependent upon continental arbiters in every matter requiring personal taste and judgment. Because they had no guiding philosophy and no program, this American upper class never made it to the top of the stairs. They remained below stairs as servants of the London princes of the world order. Their self-abasement not only manifested itself in an unusually high rate of suicide, but also in the slower forms of self-destruction, alcoholism, drug addiction, and homosexuality. Homosexuality is not so much a type of sexual drive as it is the expression of deeper needs, the desire for self-degradation, or the seeking of a partner whom one can humiliate and degrade. It could hardly be unexpected that such a ruling class would eagerly hail the 20th century crusade to enthrone communism as the vehicle of the world order. In their quest for wealth, the Rothschilds did not overlook either the small farmer or the stockpiling and wholesaling of grain. They developed a farm loan system which has been the curse of the farmers for more than a century. R.F. Pettigrew noted in the British Guardian, "This system of banking, causing the ultimate ruin of all those who cultivate the soil, was the invention of Lord Overstone, with the assistance of the Rothschilds, bankers of Europe." One of their greatest triumphs was the successful outcome of the Rothschilds' protracted war against the Russian imperial family. The family name of the Romanovs was derived from Roma Nova, New Rome. It embodied the ancient prophecy that Moscow was to become the new Rome. The family originated with Prince Pruss, brother of Emperor August of Rome, who founded Prussia. In 1614, Michael became the first Romanov Tsar. After the fall of Napoleon, the Rothschilds turned all their hatred against the Romanovs. In 1825, they poisoned Alexander I. In 1855, they poisoned Nicholas I. Other assassinations followed, culminating on the night of November 6, 1917, when a dozen Red Guards drove a truck up to the Imperial Bank building in Moscow. They loaded the imperial jewel collection and million gold, loot totaling more than $1 billion. The new regime also confiscated the 150 million acres in Russia personally owned by the Tsar. Of equal importance were the enormous cash reserves which the Tsar had invested abroad in European and American banks. The New York Times stated that the Tsar had $5 million in Guarani Trust and $5 million in the National City Bank. Other authorities stated it was $5 million in each bank. Between 1905 and 1910, the Tsar had sent more than $900 million to be deposited in 6 leading New York banks: Chase, National City, Guarani Trust, J.P. Morgan, Hanover, and Manufacturers Trust. These were the principal banks controlled by the House of Rothschild through their American agents, J.P. Morgan and Kuhn, Loeb Company. These were also the 6 New York banks which bought the controlling stock in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York in 1914. They have held control of the stock ever since. The Tsar also had $115 million in 4 English banks. He had $35 million in the Bank of England, $25 million in Barings, $25 million in Barclays, and $30 million in Lloyd's Bank. In Paris, the Tsar had $100 million in Banque de France and $80 million in the Rothschild Bank of Paris. In Berlin, he had $132 million in the Mendelssohn Bank, which had long been bankers to Russia. None of these sums has ever been disbursed. At compound interest since 1916, they amount to more than $50 billion. 2 claimants later appeared, a son, Alexis, and a daughter, Anastasia. Despite a great deal of proof substantiating their claims, Peter Kurth notes in Anastasia that Lord Mountbatten put up the money for court battles against Anastasia. Although he was Empress Alexandra's nephew, he was the guiding force behind Anastasia's opposition. The Battenbergs, or Mountbattens, were also related to the Rothschild family. They did not wish to see the Tsar's fortune reclaimed and removed from the Rothschild banks. Kurth also notes, in a 1959 series on the history of the great British banks, for example, the Observer of London remarked of Baring Brothers, the Romanovs were among their most distinguished clients. It is affirmed that Baring still holds a deposit of more than £40 million that was left them by the Romanovs. Anthony Sampson, editor-in-chief, said no protests were made. This story is generally considered to be true. In the early 19th century, the Rothschilds began to consolidate their profits from government loans into various business ventures, which have done very well. Fortuitous trading on the London Stock Exchange after Waterloo gave Nathaniel Mayer Rothschild a sizable portion of the consols, which formed the bulk of the deposits of the Bank of England. Joseph Wechsberg notes, in The Merchant Bankers, there is the Sun Alliance Life Insurance Company, most aristocratic of all insurance companies, founded by Nathan Rothschild in 1824. Brinko, the British Newfoundland Corp., founded by the British and French Rothschilds in 1952. The Anglo-American Corp., Bowater, Rio Tinto, and others. Not only does the bank rate of the Bank of England affect the interest rates in other nations, the price of gold also plays a crucial role in the monetary affairs of nations, even if they are no longer on the gold standard. The dominant role played by the House of Rothschild in the Bank of England is augmented by another peculiar duty of the firm, the daily fixing of the world price of gold. The News Chronicle of December 12, 1938, describes this ritual. The story of the gold fixing has often been told. How every weekday at 11 a.m. the representatives of 5 firms of bullion brokers and 1 firm of refiners meet at the office of Messrs. Rothschild, except on Saturday, and there fix the sterling price of gold. There is, however, a great deal of activity which lies behind this final act. This centralization of the demand for and the supply of gold in one office and the fixing of the price of gold on that basis. A price of gold is first suggested, probably by the representative of Messrs. Rothschild, who also acts for the Bank of England and the Exchange Equalization Account. The banking houses privileged to meet with the Rothschilds to set the world price of gold are known as the Club of Five. In 1958, they were N.M. Rothschild, Samuel Montague, Mackata and Goldsmith, Sharps Pixley, and Johnson Matthey. In 1961, the London accepting houses operating by approval of the Governor of the Bank of England were Barings, Brown, Shipley, Arbuthnot Latham, William Brants and Sons, Erlangers, Anthony Gibbs and Company, Guinness Mahone Hawkins, S. Jaffet, Kleinwort and Sons, Lazard Brothers, Samuel Montague, Morgan Grenfell, N.M. Rothschild, M. Samuel, J. Henry Schroeder, and S.G. Warburg. These chosen firms rule the financial establishment in the City of London. In 1961, the leading business groups in England were listed by William M. Clark as 1. Morgan Grenfell Limited, Lord Bister, the Peabody J.P. Morgan firm. 2. Jardine Matheson. 3. Rothschild Samuel Oppenheimer, comprising Rio Tinto, British South Africa Company, Shell Petroleum, Brinco, British Newfoundland Corporation. 4. Lazard Brothers Shell, English Electric, Canadian Eagle Oil. 5. Lloyds Bank. 6. Barclays Bank. 7. Peninsular and Orient Lines. 8. Cunard. 9. Midland Group, Eagle Star, Higginson, Cavendish Bentinck. 10. Prudential. 11. Imperial Chemical Industries. 12. Bowater. 13. Courtaulds. 14. Unilever. Although this list shows the Rothschild Group as only one of 14, in fact they hold large positions or influence in the other groups of this list. In 1982, the principal directorships held by the London Rothschilds were Lord Rothschild, N.M. Rothschild and Sons, Arkin N.V. Curacao, Chairman Rothschild's Continuation, and Rothschild Incorporated USA. Edmund Leopold de Rothschild and Sons, Alfred Dunhill Limited, Rothschild Continuation, Rothschild Trust, Rothmans International, CHMN Tokyo Pacific Holdings N.V., Baron Eric Rothschild, N.M. Rothschild and Sons, Evelyn de Rothschild, CHMN N.M. Rothschild and Sons, De Beers Consolidated Mines Limited South Africa, Eagle Star Insurance Company, CHMN The Economist Newspaper Limited, IBM UK Limited, La Banque Privée SA, Manufacturers Hanover Limited, Rothschild Continuation Limited, CHMN United Race Courses Ltd, Leopold de Rothschild, N.M. Rothschild and Sons, Alliance Assurance Company, Bank of England, The London Assurance, Rothschild Continuation Ltd, Rothschild Continuation Holdings AG Switzerland, Sun Alliance and London Assurance Company, Sun Insurance Office Limited. The British firms comprising the major basis of the Rothschild fortune are Sun Alliance Assurance, Eagle Star, De Beers, and Rio Tinto. Eagle Star's directors include Duncan McKinnon, of Hambro Investment Trust, Earl Cadogan, whose mother was a Hambro, Sir Robert Clark, Chairman Hill Samuel Company, Marquis Linlithgow, Charles Hope, whose mother was a milliner. He married Judith Baring, Evelyn de Rothschild, and Sir Ian Stewart of Brown Shipley Company, who has been Parliamentary Private Secretary to the Chancellor of the Exchequer since 1979. De Beers directors include Harry F. Oppenheimer, Sir Philip Oppenheimer, A. Oppenheimer, N.F. Baron Evelyn de Rothschild, and Sidney Spiro. Spiro is also a director of Rio Tinto, Hambros Bank, Barclays Bank, and Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce. De Beers interlocks with Anglo-American Corporation of South Africa, of which Harry F. Oppenheimer is chairman, and Anglo-American Gold Investment Company, of which Julian Ogilvy Thompson is chairman, and Harry F. Oppenheimer director. De Beers interlocks with Hambros Bank, whose chairman is Jocelyn Hambro. Directors are R.N. Hambro, C. Hambro, Honorable H.W. Astor, Sir Ian Morrow, Chairman UKO Int and the Laird Group, International Harvester, Rolls-Royce, and the Brush Group, Clay, Director of the Bank of England, Mark Weinberg, and Sidney Spiro. Rio Tinto's chairman is Sir Anthony Tuke. He is also Chairman Barclays Bank and member Trilateral Commission. Directors are Lord Shackleton, Lord Privy Seal, Chairman RTZ Dev, Corp, Lord Charteris of Amos Field, grandson of Earl of Weems, married to daughter of Viscount Margison, private secretary to Queen Elizabeth, director of Claddag's Hotel and Hotel, Sir David Orr, Chairman Unilever, and Sidney Spiro, Hambros Bank. The principal Rothschild firm is Sun Alliance Assurance, which Nathan Mayer Rothschild founded in 1824, with Sir Alex Baring, Samuel Gurney, and Sir Moses Montefiore, with an initial capital of £5 million. Chairman of Sun Alliance is Lord Aldington, Toby Lowe, who is also Chairman Westland Aircraft, Director of Citibank, Citicorp, and Ltd, Lord Aberconway, DP Chairman, HVA Lambert, Chairman Barclays Bank, Earl of Crawford, Robert A. Lindsay, whose mother was a Cavendish. He is also Chairman National Westminster Bank, former Private Secretary to the Secretary of Treasury, Minister of State for Defense, Minister of State for Foreign and Commercial Affairs, Lord Astor, whose mother was the daughter of Earl of Minto. He is the former Chairman of the Times, Sir Charles Ball, of Kleinwort Benson, also Director of Chubb & Sons, Barclays Bank, Cadbury Schwepp, Sir Alan Dalton, Director Naval, Westminster Bank, Duke of Devonshire. His mother was a Cecil, one of England's 3 ruling families since the Middle Ages. Sir Derek Holden Brown, Chairman Allied Breweries. Director Hiram Walker, J&C James, Trustee Grosvenor Estates, which owns large sections of London. Henry Keswick, Chairman Matheson and Company. Lord Kindersley, Exec. Director of Lazard Brothers, Director of Marconi, English Electric, British Match, Swedish Match. Sir Peter Matthews, Chairman Vickers, Ritchie, Chairman. British Incolon, Director of Vickers, IDC Limited. Evelyn de Rothschild, Chairman N.M. Rothschild and Sons. The Rothschilds have had a large position in Vickers for many years. Chairman is Sir Peter Matthews, also Director Lloyds Bank and Sun Alliance. Directors are T. Neville, Baron Braybrook, Earl of Warwick, the Salisburys, one of 3 ruling families in England. Sir Alastair Frame, Chief Exec. Rio Tinto Zinc, Director of Plessy & Company, UK, and the Atomic Energy Authority. Chairman of Vickers in 1956 was Edward Knowles, son of the private secretary to King Edward VII for 40 years and George V for 5 years. For more than a century, a widespread belief has been deliberately fostered in the United States that the Rothschilds were of little significance in the American financial scene. With this cover, they have been able to manipulate political and financial developments in this country to their own advantage. In 1837, the Rothschilds let their American representative, W.L. and M.S. Joseph, go bankrupt in the crash, while they threw their cash reserves behind a newcomer, August Belmont, and their secret representative, George Peabody of London. Birmingham notes in Our Crowd, in the Panic of 1837, Belmont was able to perform a service which he would repeat in subsequent panics, thanks to the hugeness of the Rothschild reservoir of capital, to start out in America operating his own Federal Reserve System. After 1837, August Belmont, Schunberg, was publicly advertised in the financial press as the American representative of the Rothschilds. When Belmont participated in a financial operation, everyone knew that the Rothschilds were involved. When Belmont took no part, and the transaction was handled by Morgan & Company or by Kuhn, Loeb Company, everyone knew that the Rothschilds were not involved. George Peabody had established his business in England through his connection with Brown Brothers, now Brown Brothers Harriman and Brown, Shipley. He had become an unidentified agent for Lord Rothschild as early as 1835. Although there is no statue of George Peabody in the Wall Street area, there is one in London, just opposite the Bank of England. George Peabody became the favorite American of Queen Victoria. His old lunchbox occupies a prominent place in the London office of Morgan Stanley to this day. By 1861, George Peabody had become the largest trader of American securities in the world. to put pressure on the Lincoln government. He began unloading them and driving prices down. At the same time, J.P. Morgan, allied with Morris Ketchum, was depleting the American gold supply by shipping it to England. He ran the price from $126 ounce to $171 ounce, reaping a good profit and putting more financial pressure on the Lincoln government. This was one of many financial operations directed by the Rothschilds for their own political and financial goals. As George Peabody had no son to take over his firm, he took on Junius Morgan as partner. Junius' son John Pierpont Morgan became known as the most powerful banker in the world, although his principal role was to secretly carry out commissions for the House of Rothschild. The New York Times, October 26, 1907, noted in connection with J.P. Morgan's actions during the Panic of 1907. In conversation with the New York Times correspondent, Lord Rothschild paid a high tribute to J.P. Morgan for his efforts in the present financial juncture in New York. He is worthy of his reputation as a great financier and a man of wonders. His latest action fills one with admiration and respect for him. This is the only recorded instance when a Rothschild praised any banker outside of his own family. March 28, 1932, the New York Times noted, London, N.M. Victor Rothschild, 21-year-old nephew of Baron Rothschild, is going to the United States soon to take a post with J.P. Morgan and Company. It was learned tonight. It is usual for progressive British bankers to send their young men to Western states temporarily, one of the most notable believers in the practice being the Anglo-American banking house of J. Henry Schroeder and Company. The Morgan-Rothschild connection explains the otherwise incomprehensible mystery of why J.P. Morgan, famed as the most powerful banker in the world, left such a modest fortune at his death in 1913, a mere $11 million after his debts were secured. Although the present members of the Morgan family seem financially secure, none of them is counted among the big rich. In Brandeis, A Free Man's Life, Alpheus T. Mason notes, young Adolph Brandeis, Justice Brandeis' father, arrived in New York, traveled for a while in the East, and then went on to the Midwest. Young Brandeis' pleasure and facility in travel were greatly enhanced by the companionship of a young friend of the Welleys then on a business trip to the United States to secure information about American investments for the House of Rothschild. Thanks to his companion's contacts and letters of introduction, Adolph saw places and met people not accessible to most foreigners. Birmingham notes in Our Crowd, in the autumn of 1874, Baron Rothschild summoned Isaac Seligman to his office. Some $55 million of U.S. bonds were to be offered by three houses: the House of Seligman, the House of Morgan, and the House of Rothschild. This was the first time that the Seligmans had been asked to participate in an issue with the Rothschilds. They were more than grateful, and thus another ally of the Rothschilds began to operate in America. A notable advantage of J.P. Morgan's work for the House of Rothschild was the carefully cultivated belief that Morgan, if not openly anti-Semitic, avoided participating in operations with banking firms, and that his firm would not hire anyone of Jewish background. It was the same deception which Nathan Mayer Rothschild had hired Morgan's predecessor, George Peabody, to perform in London. It was a traditional belief on Wall Street that if you wished to deal with a Gentiles-only firm, you went to J.P. Morgan. If you wanted a Jewish firm, there were a number of houses available, but the most influential, by far, was Kuhn, Loeb Company. In either case, the customer was never made aware that he was dealing with an American representative of the House of Rothschild. Jacob Schiff, who brought the Kuhn, Loeb firm to its preeminent role in American finance, was born in the Rothschild house at 148 Judengasse, Frankfurt, which the Rothschilds shared with the Schiff family. In 1867, Abraham Kuhn and Solomon Loeb, two Cincinnati dry goods merchants, founded the banking house of Kuhn, Loeb. In 1875, Jacob Schiff arrived from Frankfurt to join the firm. He married Therese, Solomon's daughter. He also brought a large amount of Rothschild capital into the firm, enabling it to expand tenfold. In 1885, Loeb retired. Jacob Schiff ran the firm from 1885 to 1920, when he died. This audiobook was uploaded by Hidden Whispers Revelation on YouTube. Please subscribe and like the video to support this work if you enjoyed listening. At no time has the House of Rothschild ever indicated publicly that it had any interest in the firm of Kuhn, Loeb Company. George R. Conroy stated in Truth magazine, Boston, December 16, 1912, Mr. Schiff is head of the great private banking house of Kuhn, Loeb and Company, which represents the Rothschild interests on this side of the Atlantic. He has been described as a financial strategist and has been for years the financial minister of the great impersonal power known as Standard Oil. He was hand in glove with the Harrimans, the Goulds, and the Rockefellers in all their railroad enterprises and has become the dominant power in the railroad and financial world of America. This is one more revelation of the hidden power of the Rothschild interests in America. Not only has it directed the Rockefeller enterprises from the time that National City Bank of Cleveland, a Rothschild bank, financed the early expansion of Rockefeller South Improvement Company, which enabled him to crush his competitors through illegal railway rebates, but it has also been the power behind the scenes of the Harriman fortunes, now Brown Brothers Harriman. It explains the frequent appointments, never elections, of Averell Harriman, the dominant power in the Democratic Party, while his partner's son, George Bush, is the Republican vice president, a heartbeat away from the presidency of the United States. It explains the secret writing of the Federal Reserve Act by Paul Warburg of Kuhn, Loeb and Company, and the even more secret deals which caused it to be enacted into law by Congress. It explains how the United States could fight World War I with Paul Warburg in charge of its banking system through the vice chairmanship of the Federal Reserve Board, Bernard Baruch as dictator of American industry as chairman of the War Industries Board, and Eugene Meyer financing the war through his position as chairman of the War Finance Corporation, printing government bonds and duplicate. Kuhn, Loeb partner Sir William Wiseman, with Colonel House correlated British and American intelligence. Operations. Kuhn, Loeb partner Lewis L. Strauss was acting head of the U.S. Food Administration under Herbert Hoover. Meanwhile, Paul's brother, Max Warburg, headed the German espionage system. Another brother was German commercial attaché in Stockholm, traditional listening post for warring nations, and Jacob Schiff had two brothers in Germany who were financing the German war effort. It was a classic case of a managed conflict, with the Rothschilds manipulating both sides from behind the scenes. At the Versailles Peace Conference, Bernard Baruch was head of the Reparations Commission. Max Warburg, on behalf of Germany, accepted the reparations terms, while Paul Warburg, Thomas Lamont, and other Wall Street bankers advised Wilson and the Dulles brothers on how American interests should be handled at this all-important diplomatic conference. The Rothschilds had decided upon the formula of a managed conflict for the First World War because of the difficulty they had encountered in defeating the Boers from 1899 to 1901. After illegally annexing the Transvaal in 1881, the British had been turned back with a resounding defeat at Majuba by Paul Kruger. In 1889, because of the discovery of vast wealth in gold and diamonds in South Africa, the Rothschilds came back to loot the nation with 400,000 British soldiers pitted against 30,000 irregulars, that is, farmers with rifles, whom the Boers could put into the field. The Boer War was started by Rothschild's agent, Lord Alfred Milner, against the wishes of a majority of the British people. His plans were aided by another Rothschild agent, Cecil Rhodes, who later left his entire fortune to the furtherance of the Rothschild program, through the Rhodes Trust, a by no means infrequent denouement among Rothschild agents, and the basis of the entire Foundation empire today. The British fought a no-prisoners, scorched earth war, destroying farms, and mercilessly shooting down Boers who tried to surrender. It was in this war that the institution of concentration camps was brought to the world, as the British rounded up and imprisoned in unsanitary, fever-ridden camps anyone thought to be sympathetic to the Boers, including many women and children, who died by the thousands. This genocidal policy would next be used by the Rothschild-financed Bolsheviks in Russia, who adopted the Boer War concept to murder 66 million Russians between 1917 and 1967. There was never any popular reaction to either of these atrocities, because of the control of media which makes discussion of these calamities a taboo subject. The career of Lord Alfred Milner, 1854 to 1925, began when he was a protege of Sir Evelyn Baring, the first Earl of Cromer, partner of Baring Brothers, bankers, who had been appointed Director General of Accounts in Egypt. Baring was then the financial advisor of the Khedive of Egypt. Since 1864, Milner had been active in the Colonial Society, founded in London in that year. In 1868, it was renamed the Royal Colonial Institute and was heavily financed by Barclays Bank, and by the Barings, Sassoons, and Jardine Matheson, all of whom were active in founding the Hong Kong-Shanghai Bank, and who were heavily interested in the Asiatic drug traffic. The staff economist of the Royal Colonial Society was Alfred Marshall, founder of the monetarist theory which Milton Friedman now peddles under the aegis of the Hoover Institution and other supposedly right-wing think tanks. Marshall, through the Oxford Group, became the patron of Wesley Clare Mitchell, who then taught Burns and Friedman. In 1884, Milner augmented the work of the Royal Colonial Society with an intergroup, the Imperial Federation League. Both groups now function as the Royal Empire Society. Vladimir Halperin, in Lord Milner and the Empire, states, "It was through Milner and some of his friends that the Round Table Group came into being." The Round Table, it should be said, is an authority to this day on all Commonwealth interests. He states that Milner raised a considerable sum for the work of the Round Table, including £10,000 from Lord Astor, £10,000 from Lord Rothschild, £10,000 from the Duke of Bedford, and £10,000 from Lord Iveagh. Milner launched a magazine called the Empire Review, later called the Round Table Quarterly. Halperin also notes another contribution of Milner. He played an important part in the drafting of the famous Balfour Declaration in December of 1917. It is a fact that, with Balfour, he was its co-author. As far back as 1915, Milner had realized the need for a Jewish national home, and had never ceased to be warmly in favor of its creation. Milner, like Lloyd George, Amory, and many others, saw that the Jewish national home could also contribute to the security of the empire in the Near East. The Milner Round Table later became the Royal Institute of International Affairs Council on Foreign Relations Combined, which exercises unopposed control for the world order over foreign and monetary policy in both the United States and Great Britain. Milner trained a group of ambitious young men who became known as his kindergarten. It included John Buchan, future Governor-General of Canada, Geoffrey Dawson, later editor of The Times, and prominent supporter of appeasement with the Cliveden set, led by Lord Astor, who owned The Times. Philip Kerr, 11th Marquess of Lothian, the youngest member of the kindergarten. He served as private secretary to Lloyd George from 1916 to 20, and was given credit as largely responsible for the German provisions of the Treaty of Versailles. He went on to say that he played an important part in dealing with India, all dominions, and the United States. He was ambassador to the United States 1935-40, and was a close friend of Waldorf and Lady Astor. George Joachim Goskin, a liberal who was hailed as the greatest chancellor of the Exchequer, head of the Cunliffe-Goskin banking house with Lord Cunliffe, governor of the Bank of England. Goskin was also Chancellor of Oxford and the University of Edinburgh. His brother, Baron Sir Edward Goskin, was ambassador to Berlin when Bethmann Hollweg told him that the Belgian treaty was a mere scrap of paper. Leopold S. Amory, who had sons, Leopold, who was executed as a traitor in 1945, and Julian, who married Prime Minister Harold Macmillan's daughter, and served as left-wing correspondent on the Spanish front. 1938-9. Churchill's personal representative to Chiang Kai-shek. 1945. Round Table Conference on Malta. 1955. Council of Europe. 1950-56. The senior Leopold Amory is described as a passionate advocate of British imperialism. He was on the staff of The Times and wrote a 7-volume history of the South African War for The Times. Served in the cabinet from 1916 to 22, MP 1911 to 45, First Lord of Admiralty, 1922 to 24, Secretary of State for India, 1940 to 45, and arranged for India to have independence. He was a trustee of the Rhodes Trust. The Milner-Rothschild relationship was described in Terence O'Brien's biography, Milner, page 97. Milner went to Paris on some business with Alphonse de Rothschild. Business calls in the city included a formal visit to Rothschild's weekend with Lord Rothschild at Traying, and visit with Edward Cecil, Lord Salisbury at Hatfield. While spending a weekend with Lord Rothschild at Traying, a press lord gave him a sleepless night. No further explanation given. Talks with Rothschild. Milner attended a Zionist dinner given by Lord Rothschild, sitting next to Lawrence of Arabia, who interpreted for him in a talk with King Faisal. On page 364, O'Brien notes, Milner lost no time in recreating his links with the city. He went first to Rio Tinto, which re-elected him to its board, and before long Rothschild asked him to be its chairman. Rio Tinto was one of the key firms in the Rothschild empire. Herbert Hoover was also appointed a director of Rio Tinto. He would soon be asked to head the Belgian Relief Commission, which prolonged World War I from 1916 to 1918. The Milner role in starting the South African War is described in British Supremacy in South Africa. Chapter 1 is headed Sir Alfred Milner's War. On March 19th, Chamberlain telegraphed to him, "The principal object of His Majesty's government in South Africa is peace. Nothing but a most flagrant offense would justify the use of force." p. 22. Milner had come to believe that war with the Transvaal was both inevitable and desirable. Milner had at last convinced Chamberlain that British supremacy in South Africa would be jeopardized unless the power of the Transvaal was broken. There is the evidence that Rothschild's Round Table minion, Milner, cold-bloodedly precipitated the Boer War for his master's gain. John Hayes Hammond, chief mining engineer for the House of Rothschild, also was sent to South Africa to precipitate the war. He formed the Uitlanders Reform Committee, with Lionel Phillips, head of gold and diamond mining firm Eckstein, the Corner House, George Farrar of East Rand Property Mines, and Colonel Frank Rhodes, brother of Cecil Rhodes. The committee was financed by Abe Bailey, Solly Joel, Barney Barnado, and the Ecksteins, all of whom were big winners in the partition of the gold and diamond properties after the war. During this activity, Hammond was arrested by Paul Kruger, sentenced to death for promoting revolution, and was allowed to leave only after paying a fine. He was then hired by the Guggenheims at a yearly salary, and in 1921 became chief lobbyist for the Council on Foreign Relations in Washington. Like other enterprises with which the Rothschilds have been connected, the Bank of England has been a center of international intrigue and espionage since its founding in 1694. Although the Rothschilds did not become associated with the bank until 1812, when Nathan Mayer Rothschild increased his fortune 6,500 times by taking advantage of false rumors that somehow swept the London Stock Exchange, purporting that England had lost at Waterloo. The Bank of England originated in a revolution when William III, Prince of Orange, drove King James II from the throne. Since the Bank of England charter was granted by William in 1694, there has never been another revolt against the crown. The royal family has been secure because the source of money, crucial to a revolution, has remained under control. King Charles II had managed to retain a shaky position because of support from the Duke of Buckingham, George Villiers, and others whose first names formed the word cabal, introducing a new term for intrigue. His successor, James II, tried to placate the powerful lords of England, but even his longtime supporters, scenting a change of power, began secret negotiations with the Prince of Orange. William I, Prince of Orange, had been married several times to and of Saxony, Charlotte de Bourbon, and Princess de Coligny. Today, every ruling house of Europe, as well as those out of power, is a direct descendant of King William, including Queen Juliana of the Netherlands, Margaretha, Queen of Denmark, Olav V of Norway, Gustav of Sweden, Constantine of Greece, Prince Rainier of Monaco, and Jean, Grand Duke of Luxembourg, whose son married the daughter of C. Douglas Dillon. Lord Shrewsbury, Charles Talbot, had been given places by both Charles II and James II. Nevertheless, he played a leading role in the Revolution. He took £12,000 to Holland to support William in 1688, returned with him, and was made Secretary of State. Sidney Godolphin, one of James II's last adherents, joined with the Duke of Sunderland and the Duchess of Portsmouth in correspondence with William prior to his invasion of England, and was appointed head of the Treasury by William. Henry Compton, Earl of Northampton and Bishop of London, had been removed by James II. He signed the invitation to William to come to England. He was reinstated in his see in 1688. His son Francis became Lord Privy Seal. John Churchill, 1st Duke of Marlborough, had entered into negotiations with the Prince of Orange in October 1687 and expressed his readiness to support him in August 1688. To allay James II's suspicions, Marlborough then signed a renewed oath of fidelity to him November 10, 1688. On November 24, 1688, he joined the forces of William of Orange. Although William had married Mary, the daughter of James II, and had a legitimate claim to the throne of England, he could not take power as long as James II was on the throne. Therefore, he entered England with a force of 10,000 foot soldiers and horse, a small force with which to conquer a great kingdom. With him were Churchill, Bentinck, the first Earl of Portland, Earl of Shrewsbury, and Lord Polwarth, whose descendant is a prominent member of the Anglo-American banking establishment. James II fled to the court of Louis XIV and was declared abdicated. Marlborough, ancestor of Winston Churchill, whose former daughter-in-law, Pam Harriman, is the leading power in the Democratic Party, is described in The Captain General by Ivor Browne. The Commissioner of Public Accounts found that the Duke of Marlborough had accepted gifts amounting to some pounds from Antonio Machado and Sir Solomon de Medina, contractors for bread and wagons for the army abroad, and 2.5% of all money allotted for payment of troops, some £175,000, later revised to pounds. Marlborough claimed it had all been spent for intelligence, but witnesses testified he could not have spent more than pounds for this purpose in all of his campaigns. Donald Chandler's biography of Marlborough points out that the bread contractors such as Solomon and Moses Medina, Meneer Hekop, Solomon Abraham, Van Derka, and Machado were for the most part Spanish or Dutch Jews of varying reliability and venality. Chandler says that they consistently gave short weight or added sand to their corn sacks. For a number of years, Medina, as chief army contractor, contributed an annual commission of pounds a year to Marlborough as his rake-off on army contracts. In addition to his English supporters, who were previously loyal to King James II, William brought with him from Amsterdam the group of avaricious financiers who were also the suppliers of his armies. One of his first official acts was the conferring of knighthood on Solomon de Medina. Machado and Pereira provisioned his armies in Spain and Holland. Medina supplied Marlborough in Flanders. Joseph Cortacet supplied Lord Galway in Spain, and Abraham Prado supplied the British Army during the 7-Year War. The most important act of William's reign was his granting of the Charter of the Bank of England in 1694, although most of his biographers omit this salient fact. The concept of a central bank which would have the right of note issue or issuing money had already taken hold in Europe. The Bank of Amsterdam was started in 1609. It aided William in his conquest of England. The Bank of Hamburg was chartered in 1619. The Bank of Sweden began the practice of issuing notes in 1661. These banks were chartered by financiers whose ancestors had been bankers in Venice and Genoa. As the tide of world power shifted northward in Europe, so did the financiers. The Warburgs of Hamburg had begun as the Abraham del Banco family, the largest bankers in Venice. An interesting technique is revealed by the Charter of the Bank of England. It was slipped through as part of a tonnage bill, which was later to become a recognized parliamentary technique. The charter provides that rates and duties upon tonnage of ships are made security to such persons as shall voluntarily advance the sum of £1,500,000 towards carrying on the war against France. Other European banks, such as the banks of Genoa, Venice, and Amsterdam, were primarily banks of deposit, but the Bank of England began the practice of coining its own credit into money, the beginning of the monetarist movement. The Bank of England soon created a new class of moneyed interests in the city, as opposed to the power of the old barons, whose fortunes derived from their landholdings. Of the 500 original stockholders, 450 lived in London. This was the dawn of the preeminence of the city, now the world's leading financial center. For this reason, the Rothschilds identified their key American banks with the code word city. Early descriptions of the shareholders of the Bank of England identify them as a society of about 1,300 persons. They included the King and Queen of England, who received shares to the value of £10,000 each, Marlborough, who invested pounds. He also invested large sums from his commissions in the East India Company in 1697, and later became governor of the Hudson Bay Company, which paid a 75% dividend. Lord Shrewsbury, who invested pounds. Godolphin, who invested pounds. He predicted that the Bank of England would not only finance trade, but would carry the burden of her wars, which was proven true. In the next 300 years, Virginia Cowles writes, in The Great Marlborough, England emerged from the war as the dominant force because the Bank of England's credit system enabled her to bear the burden of war without undue strain. Other charter subscribers were Bentinck, later the first Earl of Portland. He had been a page in William of Orange's household, accompanied William to England in 1670 on his initial visit. handled the delicate negotiations of his marriage with Mary in 1677, and prepared the details of William's invasion of England. He was given the title of Earl of Portland and became the most trusted agent of William's foreign policy. In 1984, we find the 9th Duke, Cavendish Bentinck, is chairman of Bayer UK Ltd. and Nuclear Chemie Mitschorp GmbH, Germany. He also had a distinguished career in foreign service, joining the Foreign Office in 1922. He represented England at the successive Paris, Hague, and Locarno conferences, was CHMN Joint Intelligence for the Chiefs of Staff 1939-45, and ambassador to Poland during the critical years of 1945-47, when that country was turned over to the Soviet Union, with England's surreptitious support. Other charter subscribers to the Bank of England were the Duke of Devonshire, William Cavendish, who built Chatsworth. He also had signed the invitation to William to assume the throne of England. He was High Steward at Anne's coronation in 1702, and was said to lead a profligate private life. The present Duke sold 7 drawings in July 1984 for $39.2 million. The 11th Duke married Deborah Freeman Mitford, daughter of Baron Redesdale. His present brother-in-law, Baron Redesdale, is Vice President of Chase Manhattan Bank. The Duke of Leeds, Sir Thomas Osborne, who also signed the invitation to William. He was Lord High Treasurer and had arranged the marriage of Mary. He was later impeached for receiving a large bribe to procure the charter of the East India Company in 1691. Because of his favored position at court, the proceedings were never concluded, and he left one of the largest fortunes in England, Earl of Pembroke, Thomas Herbert, who became the first Lord of the Admiralty and later Lord Privy Seal, Earl of Carnarvon, who is also Earl of Powys and Earl of Bradford, Lord Edward Russell, created Earl of Orford 1697. He had joined the service of William in 1683, was appointed Treasurer of the Navy 1689, First Lord of Admiralty 1696-17, and Lord Justice 1697-1714. Sir Robert Walpole, the famed British leader, was created Earl of Orford in the second creation. William Paterson, usually credited with being the founder of the Bank of England. He was forced out within a year. Sir Theodore Jansen, who invested £10,000. Dr. Hugh Chamberlain. Jonas Gill, an eccentric writer and pamphleteer. Dr. Nicholas Barbin, son of Praise God Barebones, who started the first insurance company in Great Britain. John Holland, a reputed Englishman who also started the Bank of Scotland in 1695. Michael Godfrey, who died at Namur, Belgium, on his way to Antwerp to establish a branch of the Bank of England. He was the first deputy governor of the Bank of England, and nephew of Sir Edward Godfrey, who was murdered by Titus Oakes in 1678. Sir John Hublin and 20 members of his family were also early stockholders. Sir John became Lord of the Admiralty and Lord Mayor of London. His brother James was deputy governor of the Bank of England. Salomon de Medina, later knighted by William III. Sir Scawen, Sir Gilbert Heathcote, Director of Bank of England 1699 to 1701, and from 1723 to 25. He was Sheriff and later Lord Mayor of London, founded the New East India in 1693. His parsimony was ridiculed by Alexander Pope in his quatrains. Sir Charles Montague, first Earl of Halifax and Chancellor of the Exchequer. The present Earl is a director of Hambros Bank. Marquis Normandy, John Sheffield, also held the title of Duke of Buckingham. He is buried in Westminster Abbey. Thomas Howard, Earl of Arundel, Comptroller of the Royal Household. Charles Chaplin, and the philosopher John Locke. In his The Bank of England, A History, Sir John Clapham notes that by 1721, a number of Spanish and Portuguese Jews had been buying stock in the Bank of England. Medina, Tuda Costas, Fonseca, Enriquez, Mendez, Núñez, Rodriguez, Salvador Teixeira de Matos, Jacob and Theodore Jacobs, Moses and Jacob Abravanel, Francis Pereira. Clapham notes that since 1751 there has been very little trading in Bank of England stock. It has been very closely held for more than 2 centuries. The Bank of England has played a prominent role in American history. Without it, the United States would not exist. The American colonists considered themselves loyal Englishmen to a man, but when they began to enjoy unequaled prosperity by printing and circulating their own colonial scrip, the stockholders of the Bank of England went to George III and informed him that their monopoly of interest-bearing notes in the colonies was at stake. He banned the scrip, with the result that there was an immediate depression in the commercial life of the Americas. This was the cause of the rebellion. As Benjamin Franklin pointed out, the little tax on tea, amounting to about $1 a year per American family, could have been borne, but the colonists could not survive the banning of their own money. The Bank of England and the Rothschilds continued to play a dominant role in the commercial life of the United States, causing panics and depressions for the Rothschilds whenever their officials were instructed to do so. The Second Bank of the United States expired in 1836, and President Jackson refused to renew it, creating great prosperity in the United States when government funds were deposited in other banks. The Rothschilds punished the upstarts by causing the Panic of 1837. As Henry Clues writes, 28 Years on Wall Street, page 157. The Panic of 1837 was aggravated by the Bank of England when it in one day threw out all the paper connected with the United States. By refusing to credit American notes and stocks, the Bank of England created financial panic among the holders of that paper. The panic enabled Rothschild's agents, Peabody and Belmont, to reap a fortune in buying up depreciated stocks during the panic. The Bank of England has played a prominent role in wars, revolutions, and espionage, as well as business panics. When Napoleon escaped from Elba in 1815, the London gold market jumped overnight from 41s. 6D to 51s. 7D. The leading buyer was Nathan Mayer Rothschild, who was under orders from the British Treasury to dispatch gold to the Duke of Wellington, grouping to stop Napoleon. After Waterloo, the price of gold dropped. During the 20th century, the most important name at the Bank of England was Lord Montague Norman. His grandfather, George Ward Norman, had been governor of the Bank of England from 1821 to 1872, longer than any other man. His other grandfather, Lord Collett, was governor of the Bank of England from 1887 to 89 and managing partner of Brown Shipley Company in London for 25 years. In 1894, Montague Norman was sent to New York to work in the offices of Brown Brothers. He was befriended by the W.A. Delano family and lived with the Marco family, partners of Brown Brothers. In 1907, Norman was elected to the court of the Bank of England. In 1912, he had a severe nervous breakdown and was treated by Jung in Switzerland. He became deputy governor of the Bank of England in 1916 and later served until 1944 as governor. The Wall Street Journal wrote of him in 1927, Mr. M. Collett Norman, the governor of the Bank of England, is now head and shoulders above all other British bankers. No other British banker has ever been as independent and supreme in the world of British finance as Mr. Norman is today. He has just been elected governor for the 8th year in succession. Before the war, no governor was allowed to hold office for more than 2 years, but Mr. Norman has broken all precedents. He runs his bank and his treasury as well. He appears to have no associations except his employees. He gives no interview. He leaves the British financial world wholly in the dark as to his plans and ideas. The idea that one individual ran the Bank of England to suit himself, with no influences, is too ridiculous to be considered. What about the Rothschilds? What about the other shareholders? Carroll Quigley, in Tragedy and Hope, notes that Mr. Norman said, "I hold the hegemony of the currency." He is called the currency dictator of Europe. Lionel Fraser of J. Henry Schroeder Wagg notes in his autobiography, All to the Good, that he was in charge of Lord Norman's personal investments. He also notes of the firm of Helbert Wagg, former jewelers from Halberstadt and now a London banking house. Later J. Henry Schroeder Wagg. The firm was official brokers on stock exchange to the great and all-powerful house of Rothschild. Both Wagg and Schroeder had been in business in London for 159 years when they merged in 1960. Another writer notes that Lord Norman frequently consulted with J.P. Morgan before making his Bank of England decisions. Gordon Richardson, chairman of J. Henry Schroeder from 1962 to 72, then became governor of the Bank of England from 1972 to 83, when he was succeeded by Robert Lee Pemberton, chairman of the National Westminster Bank, also director of Equitable. He married into the Cecil Burley family. The present directors of the Bank of England are G.N.V. McMahon, deputy governor since 1964, economic analyst Treasury 1953 to 57, Advisor, British Embassy, Washington, 1957–60. Sir Adrian Cadbury, Chairman, Cadbury Schweppes, dir IBM UK. Leopold de Rothschild, N.M. Rothschild and Sons, etc. George V, London, exec. dir Bank of England since 1947. Served with IMF 1955–58. A.D. Loch Ness, dir Henry Schroeder G.A. Drain. Member, Trilateral Commission. Treasurer, European Movement. Franco-British Council, British North American. Committee, lawyer for many unions and health associations. Sir Jasper Hallam has been on the board since 1936. Scully, Chairman, S.G. Warburg Company, Orion Insurance, Union Discount of London, Mercury Securities, which now owns S.G. Warburg Company. Inane Holdings, Clay, DEP Chairman, Hambros Bank, Chairman Johnson and Firth Brown Ltd, Hambros Life Assurance, Sir David Steele, Chairman. British Petroleum, dir Kuwait Oil Company, The Wellcome Trust, Trustee The Economist, whose chairman is Evelyn de Rothschild. Lord Nelson of Stafford, Chairman G Limited, Chairman Royal Worcester Company. Natal, Bank of Australasia, International Nickel, British Aircraft, English Electric, Marconi Limited, Chairman World Power Conference. Worshipful Company of Goldsmiths, Middle Eastern Association. Lord Weir, Chairman. The Weir Group, Chairman. Great Northern Investment Trust. E.A.J. George, Exec. Dir Bank of England, dir Gilt Edge Division Bank of England. IMF 1972–72. Bank for International Settlements 1966–69. Sir Hector Lang, Chairman United Biscuit, Allied Lions, Royal Insurance. Sir Alastair Pilkington, Chairman Pilkington Brothers Glass, dir. British Petroleum, British Railways Board. The Bank of England also dominates the Bank of Scotland, whose chairman is Robert Bruce, Lord Balfour. His title Balfour of Burleigh was created in 1607. He is manager of English Electric and Viking Oil. He married the daughter of magnate Yes Manasseh. Directors of Bank of Scotland include Lord Clydesmere, also dir Barclays Bank, and Right Honourable Lord Polwarth, Director of Halliburton's, which interlocks with the Rothschild First Citibank of Houston and Citibank, Imperial Chemical Industries, Canadian Pacific, and Brown and Root Wimpey Highland Fabricators, which interlocks with George Wimpey plc, largest construction firm in the British Empire, whose 44 companies have revenues of £1.2 billion per year. Lord Polwarth's daughter married Baron Moran, High Commissioner of Canada, who previously served as ambassador to Hungary and to Chad. Baron Moran's daughter married Baron Mountevans, manager of Consolidated Goldfields. Directors of George plc included S.S. Jardine, Viscount Hood, who is Chairman Petrofina UK, and Director J. Henry Schroederwag, and Union Miniere, and Sir Joseph Latham, Chairman Ariel International, Director Deutsches Kreditbank. Company interlocks with Schroeder Ltd, parent of J. Henry Schroederwag. The Earl of Airlie, David Ogilvy, is chairman of Schroeder. He married Virginia Ryan, granddaughter of Otto Kahn and Thomas Fortune Ryan. The Earl is also director of Royal Bank of Scotland. Directors of Schroeder include Lord Franks, director of the Rockefeller Foundation, the Rhodes Trust, and Kennedy Center. He is an ambassador to the United States. Mallinckrodt, Sir E.G. Woodruff of Unilever, and Daniel Jansen of the Bank of England. One of the great Rothschild hoaxes was the disarmament movement of the early 1930s. The idea was not to disarm, but to persuade the nations to junk what arms they had so they could later be sold new ones. The merchants of death, as they were popularly known in those days, were never more than errand boys for their true masters, the bankers of death, or, as they were also known, the Brotherhood of Death. In 1897, Vickers, in which Rothschilds had the largest holding, bought Naval Construction and Armament Company and Maxim Nordenfeldt Guns and Ammunition Company. The new Vickers Maxim Company was able to test its products in the Spanish-American War, which was set off by Seligman Company to obtain the white gold, sugar, of Cuba, the Boer War of 1899 to 1901, to seize the gold and diamond fields of the Witwatersrand, and the Russo-Japanese War of 1905, designed to weaken the Tsar and make the communist revolution inevitable. These three wars provided the excuse for tooling up for the mass production of World Wars I and II. In 1897, an international power trust was formed, consisting of DuPont, Nobel, Koln, and Rottweiler, which divided the world into 4 distinct sales territories. The chairman of Vickers, Sir Herbert Lawrence, was director of Sun Assurance Office Ltd., Sun Life Assurance, and chairman the London Committee of the Ottoman Bank. Directors included Sir Otto Niemeyer, director of the Bank of England, and the Anglo-International Bank. S. Lowy, the German arms magnate, Lowy and Company. Sir Vincent Caillard, president of the Ottoman Debt Council, financial expert on the Near East, and Sir Basil Zaharoff, the mystery man of Europe. The high-water mark of the Merchants of Death hoax was reached in the Nye Committee hearings of 1934, copies of which are invariably missing in government libraries. Alger Hiss was investigator and counsel for the committee. Typical was Chairman Nye's questioning of Mr. Carse of the Electric Boat Company, a subsidiary of Vickers, Chairman NY. In 1917, Mr. Carse drafted a letter to help Zaharoff avoid paying income tax on your commissions to him of $766,852. There is Exhibit 24, a letter dated September 21, 1917, addressed to Mr. H.C. Sheridan, Washington, D.C. Who is Mr. Sheridan, Mr. Carse? Carse. He owns the Hotel Washington. At that time, he was the agent of Vickers Limited in this country, and he was also a representative of Zaharoff. Mr. Sheridan handled Mr. Zaharoff's income tax with White and Case. CHMN. Did you know that this was false? That this omission of $1 million referred to as actually Sir Basil Zaharoff's income? Carse. No, I did not know anything about Zaharoff's income. CHMN. But you have told us that a letter by Zaharoff 6 weeks earlier that 82,000 francs he received was his own personal income. Carse. I do not know what Zaharoff did in his business. He did not tell me. CHMN. Did Zaharoff succeed in escaping the payment of income tax to the United States? Carse. I believe there was some settlement made. Sheridan handled Zaharoff was never a stockholder insofar as I ever knew. The men who handle very large stock do not put the stock in their own names. CHMN. Zaharoff wrote to May 19, 1925, I desire no thanks for what I have done, because I am bound to attend to the interest of my firm of Vickers and the Electric Boat Company, in both of which I am a stockholder. Carse. I know he told me that, but I was never able to trace anything. Senator Clark then pursued questioning on how the armaments firms and oil companies promoted wars. Clark. This whole occasion of arming Peru and of the revolution in Bolivia on the basis of arming against Chile was based on erroneous rumor? Mr. Spieser. That is my impression. Clark. You wanted to interest the large oil companies in financing an armament program for South America. Carse. I was willing to present any proposition the government might approve with regard to any oil companies which might be interested. The Nye Committee frequently came back to Zaharoff's activities, referring to him as a kind of super spy in high social and influential circles. For many years, he exercised great influence on Prime Minister Lloyd George of England. Zaharoff, who began his career as a brothel tout and underworld tough, arranged for Lloyd George to have an affair with Zaharoff's wife. Arthur Maunde Gregory, an associate of Lloyd George, was also a Zaharoff agent. Maunde for many years regularly peddled peerages in London clubs. Knighthoods, not hereditary, were pounds. Baronetcies sold for as high as £40,000, of which he paid Lloyd George a standard pound each. Maunde Gregory was also closely associated with Sir Basil Thompson in British counter-espionage. Zaharoff, who was born in 1851 in Constantinople, married one Emily and Burrows of Knightsbridge. Maunde Gregory then introduced Emily into the insatiable Lloyd George. From that time on, he was at Zaharoff's mercy. Although Zaharoff was closely associated with Lloyd George throughout World War I until 1922, when their association effectively ended Lloyd George's political career, the name Zaharoff appears nowhere in Lloyd George's extensive memoirs. Lloyd George's political career came to an end after Zaharoff persuaded him to help the Greeks against Turkey in 1920, a disastrous adventure which brought about Lloyd George's downfall from political power. George Donald McCormick, in The Mask of Merlin, the definitive work on Lloyd George, states, Zaharoff kept him, Lloyd George, closely informed on the Balkans. During the war, Zaharoff. Conspirators established their real governing body, the World Order, through the Royal Institute of International Affairs and its American subsidiary, the Council on Foreign Relations. In 1895, Cecil Rhodes, South African agent of the Rothschilds, established a secret society whose avowed purposes was as follows. In the end, Great Britain is to establish a power so overwhelming that wars must cease and the millennium be realized. To achieve this goal, he left $150 million to the Rhodes Trust. The Rothschilds already had a group with similar aims, the Round Table, set up by Lord Alfred Milner, into which J.P. Morgan had been recruited in 1899. The Council on Foreign Relations Handbook of 1936 states, on May 30th, 1919, several leading members of the delegations to the Paris Peace Conference met at the Hotel Majestic in Paris to discuss setting up an international group which would advise their respective governments on international affairs. The U.S. was represented by General Tasker H. Bliss, Chief of Staff, U.S. Army, Colonel Edward M. House, Whitney H. Shepherdson, Dr. James T. Shotwell, and Professor Archibald Coolidge. Great Britain was unofficially represented by Lord Robert Cecil, Lionel Curtis, Lord Eustace Percy, and Harold Temperley. It was decided at this meeting to call the proposed organization the Institute of International Affairs. At a meeting on June 5, 1919, the planners decided it would be best to have separate organizations cooperating with each other. Consequently, they organized the Council on Foreign Relations, with headquarters in New York, and a sister organization, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, in London, also known as the Chatham House Study Group, to advise the British government. A subsidiary organization, the Institute of Pacific Relations, was set up to deal exclusively with Far Eastern affairs. Other organizations were set up in Paris and Hamburg, the Hamburg branch being called the Institut für Auswärtige Politik, and the Paris branch being known as Centre d'études de politique étrangère, at 13 Rue de Four, Paris 6. The Hamburg branch was established, of course, because of the Warburg family bank there. Having dominated the Paris Peace Conference, Baron Edmund de Rothschild saw the establishment of the world order through these groups as the crowning achievement of his life. The founders of the RIA were, one and all, Rothschild men. Honorary chairman of the CFR was Elihu Root, lawyer for Morgan & Kuhn, Loeb Company, Alexander Hemphill, a Morgan banker, and Otto Kahn of Kuhn, Loeb Company. The founders of the RIJ were Rothschild's principal South African agents, Sir Otto Beit, trustee of Rhodes Estate and director of British South Africa Company, Percy Allport Maltino, son of the first premier of Cape Colony, Sir Abe Bailey, owner of the Transvaal mines, who worked closely with Sir Alfred Milner in starting the Boer War, John W. Willard Bennett, who became General Eisenhower's political advisor at SHEF London 1944-45, Sir Julian Kahn, and Lionel Curtis, colonial secretary of the Transvaal, who gave his address as the Round Table, 175, Piccadilly Road, London. He was later appointed by lecturer on the colonial history of South Africa. Other founders of RIA included 4 members of the Astor family: Viscount Astor, Honorable F.D.L. Astor, M.L. Astor, and H.J.J. Astor, the latter being CHMN of the Times and director of Hambros Bank. The first president of RIA was Lieutenant Colonel R.W. Leonard, president of the Koniagas Mines. The Lord Patron was Her Majesty the Queen. All prime ministers and viceroys of the colonies since 1923 have been honorary presidents of RIA. Stephen King Hall, in his definitive work, Chatham House, says, "The Prince of Wales graciously accepted the office of visitor." This appointment secured that the Institute could never be perverted to party or propaganda purposes. The 1934 list of members of RIA included Sir Austen Chamberlain, Prime Minister, Chancellor of the Exchequer, Lord Privy Seal, and Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, Harold Macmillan, who married the daughter of the Duke of Devonshire and later became Prime Minister, and Lord Eustace Percy, Duke of Northumberland. The 1942 membership list includes Sir Roderick Jones, head of Reuters, G.M. Gathorne Hardy, Sir Andrew McFadyen, Chairman North British Borneo Company and United Rubber Estates. He served with the British Treasury 1910 to 1917, represented the Treasury at the Paris Peace Conference 1919-20, was General Secretary of the Reparations Commission 1922-25, Commissioner of Controlled Revenues Berlin 1924-30, later with S.G. Warburg Company, Colonel Vickers, and Lord Brand, Managing Director Lazard Brothers, who married Lady Astor's sister, Phyllis Langhorne, was DP chairman. British mission in Washington 1917–18, financial advisor to Lord Robert Cecil, CHM and Supreme Economic Council at the Paris Peace Conference. George Gibson, Dyer Bank of England. John Hambro of Hambros Bank. Lord Derby, Edward Villiers, Lord of Treasury, Secretary of State for War, 1916–1918, who had a 69,000-acre estate in Lancashire, and Lord Cromer, Baring. During its early years, RIA was principally funded by the Rothschilds through donations funneled through Sir Abe Bailey and Sir Alfred Beit. Since then, it has been funded with many millions of dollars by the Rockefeller Foundation and the Carnegie Corporation. In 1936, the RIA $400,000 budget was also funded by the following corporate subscribers: N.M. Rothschild and Sons, British South Africa Company, Bank of England, Reuters News Agency, Prudential Assurance Company, Sun Insurance Office Ltd., and Vickers Armstrong Limited, all of which were known as Rothschild Enterprises. Other subscribers were J. Henry Schroeder Company, Lazard Frères, Morgan Grenfell, Erlangers Limited, and E.D. Sassoon Company. A number of popular books now in circulation claim that the Council on Foreign Relations is the secret government of the United States. Nothing could be more incorrect. The members of the Council on Foreign Relations have never originated a single item of policy for the U.S. government. They merely transmit orders to our government officials from the RIA and the House of Rothschild in London. It is true that the CFR comprises a ruling elite in the United States, but they are mere colonial governors absolutely responsible to their overseers in the world order. However, every prominent American mentioned in the present book is a member of the CFR, and therefore it is not necessary to note it each time a name is mentioned. Not only do they transmit orders to the White House, the Cabinet, the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, and other government institutions, but they also maintain absolute control of the foundations, whose duty it is to formulate policy or organize it in acceptable form to be transmitted to the government. Shoup's Imperial Brain Trust, 1969, notes that the CFR includes 22 trustees of Brookings Institution, 29 at Rand, 14 at Hudson, 33 at Middle East Institute, 14 of 19 trustees of the Rockefeller Foundation, 10 of 17 at Carnegie, 7 of 16 at Ford Foundation, 6 of 11 at Rockefeller Brothers Fund. This proves that the CFR runs these major foundations. In the academic world, CFR members number 58 on the faculty at Princeton, 69 at the University of Chicago, and 34 at Harvard. In the banks which are the principal owners of Federal Reserve Bank stock, directors of Chase include 7 CFR members, 8 at J.P. Morgan, 7 at First Natal, Citi, now Citibank, 6 at Chemical Bank, and 6 at Brown Brothers Harriman. The 1968 list of CFR members included John J. McCloy, chairman of the board, Frank Altschul, secretary and vice pres, David Rockefeller vice pres, and directors Robert V, Rusa, Dillon, and Allen Dulles. McCloy also served as chairman Ford Foundation 1953 to 65, director of the Rockefeller Foundation, and personal lawyer to the Rockefeller family interests. His career is typical of a leading official of the world order. A student at Harvard, he became a protege of Felix Frankfurter. He joined the firm of Cravath, Swain and Moore, lawyers for Kuhn, Loeb Company, where he remained from 1925 to 40. In 1940, Frankfurter recommended him to Henry Stimson as assistant, section of war, where he remained from 1941 to 45. He wrote and issued the infamous War Department directive that military officers must disregard political views of servicemen, unless there is a specific finding that the individual involved has a loyalty to the Communist Party which overrides his loyalty to the U.S. Senator McCarthy termed this directive treasonable. McCloy succeeded Eugene Meyer as president of the World Bank from 1947 to 49, was appointed High Commissioner of Germany, where he served from 1949 to 52, was chairman of the board Chase Natal Bank from 1953 to 61, and Rockefeller's attorney since then. He is a director of Union Pacific, ATT, Dreyfus, Squibb, and Mercedes-Benz. He married Ellen Zinsser, who is not otherwise identified in McCloy's 1947 current biography. In the 1961 issue, she is identified as the niece of Hans Zinsser, a bacteriologist. This is critical because she is also the daughter of John Zinsser, partner of J.P. Morgan Company and chairman of the board of Sharp and Dohme Chemicals. It is an interesting footnote to history that the son-in-law of a J.P. Morgan partner should be appointed U.S. High Commissioner of a vanquished Germany. The New York Times noted on August 6, 1965, J.J. McCloy proposes foundation pattern for European giving. He stated at Salzburg, "I wish that there could be erected in Europe a complex of foundations whose representatives could exchange thoughts with those of American foundations and thus form a sort of informal approach to some of the great problems of the day." Informal is the code word of the world order. It means issuing from world headquarters. McCloy did not state the obvious, that 5 men control all of the major U.S. foundations, and that he wished they could have the same system in Europe. The RIA has worked closely with the London School of Economics, which was set up as a training school for the world order bureaucrats. The school was established in 1920 with financial aid from the Rothschilds and Sir Julius Wernher. Sir Ernest Cassel later gave the school £472,000. Professor J. H. Morgan wrote in Quarterly Review, January 1939, "When I once asked Lord Haldane why he persuaded his friend Sir Ernest Cassel, grandfather of Lady Mountbatten, to settle by his will large sums on the London School of Economics, he replied, 'Our object is to make this institution a place to raise and train the bureaucracy of the future socialist state.'" Sir William Beveridge, author of Great Britain's Ruinous Cradle to the Grave Political Program, was director of the London School of Economics from 1920 to 1937. The British Empire has prospered on piracy, slavery, and the drug traffic. Drake's Pirates became the Merchants Adventurers Company, Sebastian Cabot, which later became the Chartered Company of East India. It was reorganized in 1700. It originally paid the King of Canton silver for tea, but discovered they would accept opium instead. This fortuitous arrangement encountered resistance from some Chinese leaders, causing England to prosecute 10 opium wars against China, from the Opium War of 1840 to 43 to the Manchurian Conquest of 1931. In 1715, the British East India Company opened its first Far East office in Canton. Crown policy deliberately fostered opium addiction among the natives to facilitate British political control. The British Empire was then threatened with bankruptcy if it lost the American colonies. In order to defeat the rebels, the profits of the opium trade with China were sent to the Elector of Hesse via Mayor Amschel Rothschild to hire 16,800 Hessian troops. Thus, the drug traffic and the Rothschilds played a pivotal role in American history, although it has been ignored or deleted from the history books. David Ricardo, father of the quantity theory of money and the rent or loot theory, was on the Court of Proprietors of the East India Company. He had John Stuart Mill appointed as chief examiner. The colonial minister of England during the Opium Wars was Edward Bulwer Lytton, who wrote the Treaty of Nanking in 1842, bringing England £21 million in silver and control over the free port of Hong Kong. Britain then allied with the Hong Society, the Triads and Assassins, to rule the Chinese to the present time. Bulwer Lytton's son was Viceroy of India during the 1880s at the height of the opium trade, and sponsored Rudyard Kipling's About the British Raj in India. The profiteers from the drug trade included William, Earl of Shelburne, who organized Britain's first intelligence service, whose agents were drawn from Britain's leading families. Its chairman was George Baring, and it employed Adam Smith, Jeremy Bentham, and Thomas Malthus. Its Geneva headquarters was run by the Mallet Prevost family, whose descendants include Alan Dulles of the CIA. Basil Lubbock's work, The Opium Clippers, 1933, lists the principal owners of British vessels engaged in the opium trade, with color illustrations of their flags. Most of them were ex-slavers. Number 1 was Honorable East India Company, known to the Chinese as Hanjian Company. 2. Jardine Matheson. 3. Dent and Company. 4. Brothers. 5. Russell and Company. 6. Kama Brothers. 7. Duchess of Athol. 8. Earl of Balcarres. 9. George IV. 10. Prince Regent. 11. Marquis of Camden. 12. Lady Melville. On February 1, 1927, the New York Times noted the passing of Sir Robert Jardine, the son and heir of the late Sir Robert Jardine, and succeeded his father as the head of Jardine Matheson and Company. Hong Kong, which for a long time held almost a monopoly in the importation of Indian opium into China. Sir Robert had inherited $20 million and 20,000 acres in Scotland. Dr. William Jardine had settled in Canton in 1819. The present Duke of Athol owns 202,000 acres at Blair Castle and is the only person in England authorized by the Crown to maintain a private army. Lady Melville's ancestor, George, the first Earl, welcomed William of Orange to the throne in 1688 and was appointed Lord Privy Seal. This audiobook was uploaded by Hidden Whispers Revelation on YouTube. Please subscribe and like the video to support this work if you enjoyed listening. In Paris, Banque Rothschild directors include Elie de Rothschild, director of New Court Securities, Banque Lumi d'Israël, 5 Arrows Fund N.V. Curaçao, Alain de Rothschild, 5 Arrows Fund Curaçao, Banque Lambert de Bruxelles, Guido Rothschild, Rio Tinto Zinc, New Court Securities, New York, Sir James Goldsmith, Hubert IV, Ambassador to Colombia, President Schneider Madrid and 10 Otis Companies, Bernard de Villemegene, President Immedal, Director Capitweld. Sir James Goldsmith is also Chairman General Occidental, which owns Grand Union and Colonial Food Stores in the U.S., Cavenham USA and Banque Occidentale. Its directors include David de Rothschild, son of Guy, who is also director of Compagnie du Nord and Société de Nickel. Through the Belgian branch of the Rothschild family, we can trace the influence of the Rothschilds in Africa during the past century. Baron Leon Lambert financed King Leopold's Belgian Empire. The Congo Syndicate included Baron Empain, Company F, Philipson and Company, and Banque Outremer. This syndicate was allied with Banque de Paris, the Anglo-Italian group, and the Peking Syndicate. The Congo Empire came into being in 1885 after Leopold had financed Stanley's explorations. It included an area the size of Poland and produced fabulous returns from Congo rubber, ivory, and slaves. Later, the Union Miniere acquired vast copper mines, the Compagnie de Katanga. One of their most ruthless agents was Emile Franca, who later became Hoover's partner in China and in the Belgian Relief Commission. His name survives at Congo's Port Franca. The Congo interests are now controlled by the Lamberts through Société Générale de Banque, which merged the Société Générale de Belgique, the oldest bank in Brussels, founded in 1822, and Banque d'Anvers, founded 1827. Its secretary is Baron Fauconville, a director of the Rockefeller Foundation. Société Générale acquired Union Miniere in December 1981. In 1972, it had acquired Compagnie Outremer, formerly Banque Outremer, and in December 1964, had acquired 25% of Société Financière de Transport and Enterprises Industrielles, the largest holding company in Europe. These firms are controlled by the Rothschild Bank, Banque Bruxelles Lambert, founded in 1840 by Baron Lambert. The present Baron is director of Société Générale de Banque and president of Compagnie Générale d'Entreprise Électriques, which owns 50 power companies. Banque Lambert de Bruxelles is also the Lambert of the Wall Street firm of Drexel Burnham Lambert, owning 19% of it. Gerard Eskenazi is director of Compagnie Générale. He is also managing director of Electrorail SA, a holding company for Schneider SA, European Trading and African Corporation, and Canadian Investment Trust. The president of Electrorail is Baron Empain. Eskenazi is also director of Compagnie Internationale de Wagons Lits, Thomas Cook Travel Agency. Baron Edouard Empain and his son Baron François Empain are also directors of Compagnie Générale. Another Belgian holding company, Delhaize's Frère etc. Lyon, established 1867, now owns Food Giant and Food Town stores in the U.S., renamed Food Lion. Through Banque Bruxelles and its interlocking companies, the Rothschilds effectively control Belgium. They also interlock with the Thurn und Taxis interests in Germany. Prince Johannes Prince Thurn und Taxis is said to be the richest man in Europe, controlling Bayerische Vereinsbank, fourth largest bank in Germany, which has 4 subsidiaries in Frankfurt, including Bankhaus Gebrüder Bethmann. Bethmann Hollweg of this family had been chancellor under Kaiser Wilhelm and had set off World War I. He was a cousin of the Rothschilds. Bayerische Vereinsbank also owns controlling interest in Banque de Parasitisme de Pays and Banque des Européens Paris. Thurn und Taxis is a direct descendant of William of Orange, who chartered the Bank of England. His mother, the Princess of Braganza of the former ruling House of Portugal, has 3 direct family connections with the present House of Windsor. Prince Thurn und Taxis also has 4 connections with the House of Windsor. The Thurn und Taxis family has enjoyed 800 years of preeminence in Europe. Originally Tasso of Bergamo, they later emigrated to Brussels. They supervised the postal service and intelligence of the most serene Republic of Venice, and later fulfilled the same post in the Habsburg Empire. The present prince has huge estates in Brazil. He is the financial advisor of the Rolling Stones, and his palace of St. Emirams is larger than Buckingham Palace. It costs 2.5 million DM a year to maintain. The Regensburg branch of the family was allied with the Fuggers and the Welsers. They now finance the Pan-European Union, which is headed by the Habsburg heir, Archduke Otto, and the Mont-Pelerin Society, a subsidiary of Pan-Europe. The House of Hesse, which played such a crucial role in the founding of the Rothschild fortune and in the founding of America, seldom appears in the news. On November 17, 1937, 6 members of the family were killed in the crash of a Sabena airliner at the fog-shrouded Ostend airport. The head of the family, Duke Ernst Ludwig, who had tried to end World War I by a desperate mission into Russia to confer with the Tsar, had died on October 9, causing the postponing of Prince Ludwig's marriage to Margaret Campbell Geddes in London for 7 weeks. Grand Duke George, the new head of the family, his wife Princess Cecilia of Greece and Denmark, 2 sons, and the Dowager Duchess, as well as the newly born son of Princess Cecilia, were all killed. The child's unexpected arrival apparently caused the tragedy, as the pilot tried to land at Ostend, an unscheduled stop. Prince Ludwig, social attaché at the German embassy in London, went ahead with the wedding on the following day. His best man was his cousin Prince Louis Mountbatten. 2 princes of Hesse had married 2 daughters of Queen Victoria. Beatrice had married Prince Henry of Battenberg, grandfather of the present husband of Queen Elizabeth. Prince Ludwig's father-in-law, Sir Auckland Campbell Geddes, also had a Rothschild connection. He was chairman of Rio Tinto. He served as Minister of National Service, 1917-19, British Ambassador to the U.S., 1920-24. His brother, Sir Eric Geddes, was a member of the Imperial War Cabinet and First Lord of the Admiralty 1917-18, Minister of National Transport 1919-21, and later Chairman Imperial Airways and Dunlop Rubber. His son, Sir Anthony Geddes, married into the Matthey family, became Director of the Bank of England, DEP Chairman Midland Bank, Director Shell Transport and Trading, and is now CHMN Dunlop Holdings. Sir Auckland's son, the 2D Baron, was with Shell Oil 1931-46, British Merchant Shipping Mission in Washington, 1942-44, Minister of War Transport, 1944-45, and is now Director of Peninsular and Orient Steamship Lines. On June 7, 1946, the New York Times headlined a front-page story from Frankfurt on Main. The Army was seeking $1,500,000 in stolen jewels, later revised to $3 million value. The jewels, belonging to the House of Hesse, had been hidden in their cellar of their castle in 1944. They belonged to Princess Margaretha, sister of Kaiser Wilhelm. A party of U.S. Army officers had held a party at the Hesse Castle to celebrate the anniversary of something. During the party, they discovered 1,600 bottles of wine buried in the cellar. Beneath the wine, they found the loot. Some of the celebrants drank the wine and divided up the jewels. Major General J.M. Bevins, who was reprimanded, later returned as part of the loot. WAC Captain Kathleen Durant and her husband, Colonel J. Durant, were tried after 2 quarts of diamonds were dug up in the backyard of their Falls Church home. Major David Watson also was sentenced. He had been previously awarded the Bronze Medal personally by General Eisenhower for his supply work, and also received the Russian Medal for Battle Merit from Marshal Zhukov. The House of Hesse is also known for the Curse of Hesse, their introduction of the family disease of hemophilia into many of the ruling houses of Europe, particularly the Spanish royal family and the Romanov family in Russia. Old Mayor Amschkel's heritage has survived intact, according to the Washington Post, December 20, 1984, which notes that Frankfurt am Main is the financial capital of Germany, headquarters of the 5 dominant German banks, with 175 foreign banks established there. It also is headquarters for the central bank and the country's largest stock exchange. Like Manhattan, it is also a center of vice and corruption, with sex shops, drugs, and frequent riots because of the presence of 11,000 American occupation troops. Penetration of the United States is shown by a full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal December 21, 1984, a solicitation to purchase all the outstanding shares of Scoville Incorporated by First City Properties Incorporated, with the deal managed by Rothschild Incorporated. 1 Rockefeller Plan, New York. First City is the Rothschild code for banks originating under their influence from the City of London financial district. First City Properties, Beverly Hills, California, is headed by Samuel Bellsberg, who also heads First City Financial Corporation Vancouver, First City Trust, Edmonton, and First City Development Limited. He is a director of Dead Sea Canal Company. The Bellsbergs started in Canada with a used furniture store, Rag and Bone Men, and are now influential wheeler dealers on the American stock market. Rothschilds Incorporated, established at the Rockefeller Address, is successor to Banque Rothschild of Paris. Its co-chairmen are Guy de Rothschild and Evelyn de Rothschild. Directors are Lord Rothschild, head of N.M. Rothschilds and Sons, London, David de Rothschild, Nathaniel de Rothschild, Eric de Rothschild, Thomas L. Piper III, Senior VP, Dylan Reed, and manager of the Rothschilds' New Court Securities. Its managing director is Wilbur L. Ross Jr., who is also director of Peabody International and N.M. Rothschilds and Sons International. Other directors of Rothschild International include John Loudon, former chairman of Shell Oil, director of Ford Motor Company, the Ford Foundation, Orion Bank, and chairman of Atlantic Institute. He is a Grand Officer of the Order of Orange-Nassau, a group formed to commemorate the chartering of the Bank of England by William of Orange in 1694. Another director of Rothschild Incorporated is Peter Fleck, born in Amsterdam, chairman New Court Securities, formerly with Erlangers, and the Banque de Pays de l'Europe Centrale of Paris, cited by Hayem as a key bank during Nazi occupation of France. Fleck is also officer of the Order. Banque de Pays de l'Europe of Paris, Paribas, was recently bought by Merrill Lynch. Paribas bought 50% of Dillon Red Limited in a consortium with Bruxelles Lambert, the Belgian Rothschilds, the Power Group and the Laurentian Group of Canada, the Tata Group of India, Elders IXL Holding Company of Australia, Swiss Bank Cantrade, and 2 British groups, Investors in Industry, a Bank of England group with 9 English and Scottish banks, and the British Postal Pension Fund. Power Corporation of Canada directors included G. Ashkenazi, of Belgian Rothschild firms, and William Simon, former Secretary of the Treasury of the U.S. The Canadian connection, the Bellsbergs and Bronfmans, demonstrates the growing power of the Rothschilds in billion-dollar mergers and takeovers of U.S. industry, including DuPont. These mergers recall the same kind of activity taking place in 1929, just before the stock market debacle, and represent the battening down of the hatches before the storm. Chapter 2. Soviet Russia. Soviet Russia was allowed to emerge from the destruction of World War II as one of the victors, solely because she was needed as the next evil empire against which the civilized West could launch a new crusade. Because Russia was bankrupt, had lost 40 million of her population in the war, plus another 66 million murdered by the Bolsheviki since 1917, and was unable to feed herself. Once again, the world order was obliged to step in with enormous subsidies of food and material from the U.S. in order to maintain an enemy power. The Belgian Relief Commission of 1916 became the Marshall Plan of 1948. Once again, the loads of supplies were shipped into Europe, ostensibly for our allies, but destined to maintain the Soviet bloc. Although Jacob Schiff's personal agent, George Kennan, had regularly toured Russia during the latter part of the 19th century, bringing in money and arms for the communist revolutionaries, his grandson said that Schiff had spent $20 million to bring about the Bolshevik Revolution. More concerted aid was called for to support an entire regime. Kennan also aided Schiff in financing the Japanese in the Russo-Japanese War of 1905. The Japanese decorated Kennan with the Gold War Medal and the Order of the Sacred Treasure. In 1915, the American International Corporation was formed in New York. Its principal goal was the coordination of aid, particularly financial assistance, to the Bolsheviks, which had previously been provided by Schiff and other bankers on an informal basis. The new firm was funded by J.P. Morgan, the Rockefellers, and the National City Bank. Chairman of the board was Frank Vanderlip, former president of National City, and member of the Jekyll Island Group, which wrote the Federal Reserve Act in 1910. Directors were Pierre DuPont, Otto Kahn of Kuhn, Loeb Company, George Herbert Walker, grandfather of Vice President George H. Bush, William Woodward, director of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, Robert S. Lovett, right-hand man of the Harriman Coon, Loeb Union Pacific Railroad, Percy Rockefeller, John D. Ryan, J. Stillman, son of James Stillman, principal organizer of the National City Bank, H. Wiggin, and Beekman Winthrop. The 1928 list of AIC directors included Percy Rockefeller, Pierre DuPont, Elisha Walker of Coon, Loeb Company, and Frank Altschul of Lazard Frères. In their program of aiding the communists, AIC worked closely with Guaranty Trust of New York, now Morgan Guaranty Trust. Guaranty Trust directors in 1903 included George F. Baker, founder of the First National Bank, August Belmont, representative of the Rothschilds, E. H. Harriman, founder of Union Pacific Railroad, former vice president of the U.S., Levi Morton, who was a director of U.S. Steel and the Union Pacific, Henry H. Rogers, partner of John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil, also a director of Union Pacific, H. M.C.K. Twombly, who married the daughter of William Vanderbilt and was now the director of 50 Banks and Industries, Frederick W. Vanderbilt, and Harry Payne Whitney. No one would seriously believe that bankers of this magnitude would finance an anti-capitalist revolution for the communists. Yet this is exactly what happened. These same men financed Woodrow Wilson's political campaigns, and it was these same men to whom Wilson referred in his opening address to the Paris Peace Conference, when he said, "There is moreover a voice calling for these definitions of principles and purposes which is, it seems to me, more thrilling and more compelling than any of the moving voices with which the troubled air of the world is filled. It is the voice of the Russian people. There are men in the United States of the finest temper who are in sympathy with Bolshevism because it appears to them to offer that regime of opportunity to the individual which they desire to bring about. The great conspiracy against Russia, Segers and Kahn, the men of the finest temper, to whom Wilson referred, the Morgans and the Rockefellers, did not really desire opportunity for the individual. What they desired was the lifelong imposition of slavery under the world order, and this is the goal which they continue to strive to achieve on a worldwide basis. These Americans of the finest temper chose Lenin to do their work because he had outlined the plan they wanted in The Threatening Catastrophe. In September 1917, 1. Nationalization of the banks. Ownership of capital which is manipulated by the banks is not lost or changed when the banks are nationalized and fused into one state bank, so that it is possible to reach a stage where the state knows whither and how, from where, and at what time millions and billions are flowing. Only control over bank providing they are merged into one state bank will allow, simultaneously with other measures which can easily be put into effect, the actual levying of income tax without concealment of property and income. The state for the first time would be in a position to survey all the monetary operations, then to control them, then to regulate economic life. Finally, to obtain millions and billions for large state operations, without paying the capitalist gentlemen sky-high commissions for their services. It would facilitate the nationalization of syndicates, abolition of commercial secrets, the nationalization of the insurance business, facilitate the control of and the compulsory organization of labor into unions, and the regulation of consumption. The nationalization of banks would make circulation of checks compulsory by law for all the rich, and introduce the confiscation of property for concealing incomes. The 5 points of the desired program, then, are nationalization of the banks, nationalization of the syndicates, the abolition of commercial secrets, and the compulsory organization of the population into consumer associations. It was the publication of this program which catapulted Lenin into the leadership of Russia via the Bolshevik Revolution. In 1917, Frank Vanderlip publicly referred to Lenin as the modern version of George Washington. The Lenin program is not only the program of Soviet Russia, it is the program of Roosevelt's New Deal, Truman's socialism, the post-war labor government in England, and the guiding principle of subsequent American administrations. The Labour government of England proved Lenin's dictum that the ownership of capital is not affected by the nationalization of the banks when they nationalized the Bank of England. The Lenin program is the entire program of the U.S. Internal Revenue Service, the actual levying of income tax without concealment of property or income, the confiscation of property for concealing incomes. The Lenin program is the program of the big rich precisely because it abolishes private property and puts it under the control of the state. The state is controlled by the big rich, the world order. The definitive authority of the Lenin program captured the attention of the financiers. Here was the opportunity to subdue and control all future competition with the power of a totalitarian state, to stifle future development, and to hold the entire population of the world in thrall to their greed. This program took Lenin back to Moscow to seize the government by force and to rule by terrorism. In Germany and the Russian Revolution, we find telegram number 952D 2615 states to men in Copenhagen, your embassy is authorized to pay 1 million rubles to Help Hand. The corresponding sum should be drawn from the legation assets. Minister Copenhagen, January 23, 1916, Dr. Help Hand. The sum of 1 million rubles already reached Petrograd and devoted to the purposes for which it was intended. On May 8, 1916, Berlin requested 130,000 for Russian propaganda. Under Secretary of State to the minister in Bern, telegram number 348, it was considered advantageous to Germany to bring out the members of Lenin's party, the Bolsheviks, who are about 40 in number. The special train will be under military escort. Vernadsky says, in his Life of Lenin, in the autumn of 1915, the German-Russian Social Democrat Parvis Help Hand, Israel Lazarevich, who had formerly been active in the Revolution of 1905, announced the paper published by him in Berlin, The Bell, his mission to serve as an intellectual link between the armed Germans and the revolutionary Russian proletariat. During the war, Help Hand was engaged in furnishing supplies to the German army in huge quantities, and so considerable amounts of money passed through his hands. A railway car in which were Lenin, Martov, and other exiles was attached to the train leaving for Germany from Switzerland on April 8, 1917. On April 13, Lenin embarked on the steamer sailing from Sassnitz to Sweden, so the trip through Germany took at least 4 days. The Leninists quickly exhausted the funds advanced by the Germans when they reached Russia, and once again the Bolshevik bid for absolute power seemed in doubt. To whom should Lenin turn but his powerful friend in the White House? Wilson promptly sent Elihu Root, Kuhn Loeb lawyer and former Secretary of State, to Russia with $20 million from his special war fund to be given to the Bolsheviks. This was revealed in congressional hearings on Russian bonds, HJ 8714, U5, which shows the financial statement of Woodrow Wilson's expenditure of the million voted him by Congress as a special war fund. The statement, showing the expenditure of $20 million in Russia by Root's special war mission to Russia, is also recorded in the Congressional Record, September 2, 1919, as given by Wilson's secretary, Joseph Tumulty. Not to be outdone in generosity, J.P. Morgan and Company also rushed financial assistance to the beleaguered Lenin terrorists. Colonel Raymond Robbins headed a Red Cross mission to Russia. Henry P. Davison, J.P. Morgan's right-hand man, also a member of the Jekyll Island team, which secretly wrote the Federal Reserve Act in 1910, had raised $370 million in cash for the Red Cross during World War I, of which several millions were brought to the Russians by Robbins' team. Aiding him in this charitable work were Frank Vanderlip, chairman of American International Corporation, and William Boyce Thompson, another director of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Major Harold H. Swift, head of the meat packing family, accompanied Robbins on this mission of mercy, or should we say business. Swift used the occasion to garner a $10 million meat order for his brother-in-law, Edward Morris, of Morris Company. On January 22, 1920, the Soviets ordered another $5 million of meat from Morris Company. Wall Street lawyer Thomas D. Thatcher was also a key man of the Robbins mission of mercy. The involvement of the J.P. Morgan firm with the Bolshevik Revolution is revealed in Harold Nicholson's biography of Dwight Morrow. Morrow was the father-in-law of Charles Lindbergh Jr. As follows, his, Morrow's, interest in Russia dated from March 1917, when Thomas D. Thatcher, his law partner, had been a member of the American Red Cross mission during the Revolution. It was strengthened by his friendship with Alex Gumberg, who had come to New York as representative of the All-Russian Textile Syndicate. "I have felt," he wrote in May 1927, "that the time would come when something would have to be done for Russia." He was himself active in furthering official relations between Soviet emissaries and the State Department, and he provided Litvinov with a warm letter of recommendation to Sir Arthur Salter in Geneva. Nor was this all. When in Paris, he gave a dinner party at Foyt's to which he invited Rakovsky and other Soviet representatives. Moreau's actions might be understandable in a professor of economics at Polytechnic, but they are incredible from a partner of the world's most prominent banking firm. Alex Gumberg was no mewling social worker but a hardcore propagandist who returned to the U.S. in 1918 as Trotsky's literary agent and promptly placed Trotsky manuscripts with publishers. Gumberg also became consultant to Chase National Bank and Simpson Thacher and Bartlett. He had been business manager of the Soviet paper Novy Mir during the first months of revolution in Russia. When Raymond Robin's Red Cross mission arrived in Russia, Gumberg served as interpreter and advisor to the mission, working closely with Thatcher. The present senior partner of Simpson Thacher and Bartlett is Cyrus Vance, who served as Carter's Secretary of State and is now a director of the Rockefeller Foundation. The international financiers, advised by Gumberg, now launched a worldwide propaganda campaign to sell the Bolsheviks as idealists, selfless humanitarians, and the modern disciples of Christ, who wished only to spread brotherhood and universal love throughout the world. The tune rang strangely against the backdrop of the machine guns steadily chattering in Russia as the disciples of love massacred millions of women and children, but none of their devout admirers in the United States heard this as a sour note. From the outset, the humanitarians showed an excessive concern for the material wealth which they had seized from its rightful owners. The New York Times noted on January 30th, 1918, a dispatch from Petrograd. The people's commissaries have decreed a state monopoly of gold. Churches, museums, and other public institutions are required to place their gold articles at the disposal of the state. Gold articles belonging to private persons must be handed over to the state. Informants shall receive 1/3 of the value of the articles. Lenin said, "The Soviet Union must carefully save its gold. When living with the wolves, how like the wolves?" One of the first orders issued by the new regime was, "The banking business is declared a state monopoly." Signed, Lenin, Krylenko, Podvalsky, Gorbanov. Marx's philosophy of history claims that the world operates solely through the economic organization of society, based on the production and exchange of goods. However, this is the worldview of the parasite, who is concerned only with obtaining his sustenance from the host. The materialist reduction of life to the obtaining of food at someone else's expense eliminates, first, man's spiritual life, second, all ideas, because the materialist idea explicitly excludes all other ideas, and third, the long-term view. The concept of investing over a period of time for a return which may not be available for years or perhaps never. The parasitic view is limited to the next meal or to creating a situation in which he cannot be dislodged before obtaining his next meal. This Marxist short-term view has become the standard doctrine in American graduate schools of business, particularly Harvard, which was financed by George F. Baker and J.P. Morgan. The result is that American industry, limited by the short-term view, has steadily declined for 25 years. The high interest rates imposed by the international bankers also force industry to concentrate on short-term gains merely to pay interest on their loans. Marx said, "The first function of gold is to give the commercial world a material by which to express value, that is, to express the value of all other goods as homogeneous variables that are qualitatively identical and quantitatively comparable." Karl Marx, SOC v. 23, page 104. Marx's economic views were entirely compatible with the views of the banking establishment in the City of London and particularly the House of Rothschild. It is no accident that Karl Marx is buried, not in Moscow, but in London, nor is it an accident that the triumph and bloodbath of the Bolsheviks in Russia gave the Rothschilds and their associates $1 billion in cash, which the Luckless had deposited in their European and New York banks. Few people know that Marx had close relations with the British aristocracy through his marriage to Jenny von Westphalen. She was related to the Scottish Dukes of Argyll, who had long been revolutionaries, and the Campbells, who set up the Baptist splinter group, the Campbellites. Jenny von Westphalen's ancestor, Anna Campbell, Countess of Balcarres and Argyll, was governess to the Prince of Orange from 1657 to 59, the future King William, who later granted the charter of the Bank of England. Archibald Campbell, 1st Duke of Argyll, accompanied William on his voyage to England in 1688 to seize the throne. The present Earl of Balcarres is related to Viscount Cowdray, Wheatman John Churchill Pearson, whose mother was the daughter of Lord Spencer Churchill. His sister married the Duke of Athol, and he married the daughter of the Earl of Bradford. The Argyll-Balcarres family is represented by the Lindsay and Campbell families. The present Earl of Crawford, Robert A. Lindsay, is the 29th Earl and also the 12th Earl of Balcarres. He is also chairman of National Westminster Bank, director of Rothschilds' Sun Alliance Assurance. His mother was a Cavendish. He was formerly private secretary to the Secretary of State and later served as Minister of State for Defense and Minister of State for Foreign and Commercial Affairs. Despite a later reputation for anti-communism, Herbert Hoover was not only the most tireless proponent of the League of Nations in partnership with Colonel House, he also was the first American to step in with large-scale assistance to prevent a massive uprising against the faltering Bolshevik regime. Hoover saved the Bolsheviks by organizing a massive program to rush food to the beleaguered communists. November 28, 1917, his associate, Colonel House, had cabled Wilson a few days after the Bolsheviks seized power, urging the extreme importance of suppressing all American newspaper criticism of the Bolsheviks. It is exceedingly important that such criticism be suppressed. The telegram was placed in a confidential file and only came to light 6 years later. In The Unknown War with Russia, Robert J. Maddox noted in 1977, Wilson greeted the March Revolution in Russia as a major step toward achieving the kind of post-war world he envisioned. He made sure the U.S. was the first to recognize the provisional government. Maddox points out that Wilson insisted that number 6 of his famous 14 points at Versailles was that Russia should continue under institutions of her own choosing, thus guaranteeing the future of the Bolshevik regime. His closest political aide, Colonel House, sent his own secretary, Kenneth Durant, to Russia to become a secretary in the Soviet Bureau in 1920. William Lawrence Sanders, chairman of Ingersoll Rand and deputy chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, wrote to Wilson, October 17, 1918, "I am in sympathy with the Soviet form of government as the best suited for the Russian people." George Foster Peabody, also deputy chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York since 1914 and noted philanthropist who organized the General Education Board for the Rockefellers, stated that he supported the Bolshevik form of state monopoly. Thus, we had 3 of the most prominent officials of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York on record as supporting Bolshevism: Sanders, Peabody, and William Boyce Thompson. Thompson then announced he was giving $1 million to promote Bolshevik propaganda in the United States. Because the Federal Reserve Bank of New York was controlled by 5 New York banks who owned 53% of its stock, and because these 5 banks were directly controlled by N.M. Rothschild and Sons of London, we can only conclude that these 3 men were merely stating the preferences of their employer. The National City Bank had already loaned Russia $50 million, and Guaranty Trust, whose directors were the leading financiers in New York, now became the financial correspondent for Soviet interests in America. In January 1922, Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover introduced on behalf of Guaranty Trust a resolution permitting relations with the new state bank at Moscow. Secretary of State Charles Evans Hughes strongly opposed this resolution, but Hoover succeeded in getting it approved. A German banker, Max May, now vice president of Guaranty Trust, became head of the foreign department of the Ruscombank in 1923, the first Soviet international bank. Who states that Max May came to the U.S. 1883, naturalized 1888, vice president Guaranty Trust 1904-18, director and member of board of Russian Commercial Bank 1922-25. J.P. Morgan and Guaranty Trust acted as the fiscal agents of the Soviet government in the U.S. The first shipments of Soviet gold, which was actually the Tsar's gold, were deposited in Guaranty Trust. In a typical move to disguise their operations, Otto Kahn and several officials of Guaranty Trust then founded an anti-communist group, United Americans, which circulated virulent anti-communist and anti-Jewish propaganda. Like most such organizations, it was designed to discredit and render impotent anyone opposed to communism who became involved in its work. On February 1, 1919, Edward L. Doheny, the oil tycoon, told C.W. Barron, founder of the Wall Street Journal, President Eliot of Harvard is teaching Bolshevism. The worst Bolsheviks in the U.S. are not only college professors, of whom President Wilson is one, but capitalists and the wives of capitalists. Frank G. Vanderlip is a Bolshevik. Socialism is the poison that destroys democracy. Socialism holds out the hope that a man can quit work and be better off. Bolshevism is the true fruit of socialism. The world headquarters of the Bolshevik movement was now at 120 Broadway on Wall Street. The Equitable Life building at 120 Broadway had been built by a corporation organized by General T. Coleman DuPont. During the early 1920s, 120 Broadway not only housed Equitable Life, but also the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, whose directors were enthusiastically supporting the Bolsheviks. The American International Corporation, which had been organized to aid the Soviet Union, Weinberg and Posner, which received a $3 million order for machinery from the Soviet Union in 1919, and whose vice president was Ludwig Martens, first Soviet ambassador to the U.S., John Grant, whose operations were financed by Olaf Ashberg of Nya Banken, Stockholm, who had transmitted large sums furnished by the Warburgs for the Bolshevik Revolution. The London agent of Nya Banken was the British Bank of North Commerce, whose chairman was Earl Grey, a close associate of Cecil Rhodes. Grant had been blacklisted by the U.S. government for his support of Germany during World War I. And on the top floor of 120 Broadway was the exclusive Bankers Club. These were the organizers of the world order. Their instrument of power was gold. The Great Soviet Encyclopedia noted, under socialist economic conditions, gold is also a universal equivalent, used as a measure of value and a scale of prices. The gold content of the Soviet ruble was established at 0.0987412 grams as per January 1, 1961. In the world's socialist market, gold is used as the universal money. Many Americans are puzzled by the relentless devotion of the Rockefeller Foundation to financing communist organizations in many parts of the world. This dedication to communism can be traced back to a crucial moment in the Bolsheviks' march to power. In 1917, Mackenzie King had established a lifelong relationship with John D. Rockefeller, Jr., whom he met in June 1914. They had been born in the same year, 1874, and seemed to agree on everything. Soon, King was working closely with Frederick T. Gates and Ivy Lee to further the Rockefeller philanthropies, which seemed to view communism as the ideal vehicle to bring about world brotherhood. King wrote to his friend Violet Markham, John D. Rockefeller Jr., the truest follower of Christ, has one purpose: to serve his fellow man. King resolved that his one purpose was to serve Rockefeller. He testified for him at the trial investigating the Colorado Iron and Fuel Company massacre before the Walsh Committee. The Rockefellers later tried to have Walsh framed and expelled from the Senate, but failed due to the obstinacy of Burton J. Wheeler. Edgar Hoover played a crucial role in setting up the frame. The Rockefellers helped Mackenzie King obtain government contracts for the Canadian Army during World War I, which set King up for later blackmail, the Panama hold over the vassals. King sold hundreds of tons of rotten meat to be sent to the Canadian Army in Europe, boots of leather, which were pasteboard and which disintegrated immediately in the water-soaked trenches, rifles that jammed when they were fired, and collar-type life preservers, previously condemned, which broke the soldiers' necks when they jumped into the water. Leon Trotsky was in New York in 1917. He received word to return to Russia at once to help bring off the Bolshevik seizure of power. The Rockefellers gave him in cash for his journey, procured a special passport for him from President Woodrow Wilson, and sent Lincoln Steffens to safeguard him on the journey. When Trotsky's ship stopped in Halifax, the Canadian Secret Service, warned that he was on board, arrested him on April 3, 1917, and interned him in Nova Scotia. The patriotic agents knew that Trotsky was on his way to Russia to take Russia out of the war against Germany, which would free many German divisions to attack the Canadian troops on the Western Front. Prime Minister Lloyd George indignantly cabled demands from London that Trotsky be released, but the Secret Service ignored him. By means never explained, Mackenzie King then stepped into the breach and obtained Trotsky's freedom. Trotsky continued on his way to Russia and became Lenin's chief deputy in the extermination of Russian citizens. He also organized the Red Army with the able help of Wall Street lawyer Thomas D. Thatcher. The agents who had arrested Trotsky were dismissed from the service. Their careers were ended. As a reward for his intervention, the the Rockefellers appointed Mackenzie King head of the Rockefeller Foundation Department of Industrial Research at a salary of $30,000 a year. The average wage in the U.S. at that time was $500 a year. Frank P. Walsh testified before a U.S. commission that the Rockefeller Foundation was a cloak for the Rockefeller Plan to lead organized labor into slavery. King also became a director of the Carnegie Corporation. Lady Laurier left him a large mansion in Ottawa, and in 1921 a group of well-wishers, led by Peter Larkin, refurbished and staffed it for him at a cost of $255,000. King then appointed Larkin High Commissioner of Canada in London. In 1940, the Canadian Parliament voted King, then Prime Minister of Canada, absolute and dictatorial powers for the duration. On King's 74th birthday in 1948, John D. Rockefeller Jr. gave him $1. The Rockefeller Foundation then put up to pay for the of King's memoirs. In his final years, King, still the rake, was exposed as a principal in the $30 million Beauharnais Power Company swindle during the building of the St. Lawrence Seaway. King had accepted $700,000 from Beauharnais for the Liberal Party, and among other enticements had received a trip to Bermuda. The Rockefellers figured in many pro-Soviet deals during the 1920s. Because of the struggle for power which developed between Stalin and Trotsky, the Rockefellers intervened in October 1926 and backed Stalin, ousting Trotsky. Years later, they would again intervene when the Kremlin was racked by disagreements. David Rockefeller summarily fired Khrushchev. John D. Rockefeller instructed his press agent, Ivy Lee, in 1925 to promote communism in the U.S. and to spark-plug a public relations drive, which culminated in 1933 with the U.S. government recognition of Soviet Russia. In 1927, Standard Oil of New Jersey built a refinery in Russia after having been promised 50% of the Caucasus oil production. The Rockefeller firm, Vacuum Oil, signed an agreement with the Soviet NAFTA syndicate to sell Russian oil in Europe and made a $75 million loan to Russia. John Moody had stated in 1911, the Standard Oil was really a bank of the most gigantic character, a bank within an industry lending vast sums of money to needy borrowers, just as other great banks were doing. The company was known as the Standard Oil Bank. As Rockefeller was no banker, this meant that the Standard Oil was being directed by professional bankers. The Standard Oil operation has always been directed by the most professional bankers in the world, the Rothschilds. Consequently, the Rothschilds, through their agents, Kuhn Loeb Company, have maintained close supervision of the Rockefeller fortune. In 1935, Stalin expropriated many foreign investments in Russia, but the Standard Oil properties were not touched. The five-year plans, 1928-32, 1933-37, and 1938-42, were all financed by the international banking houses. During the principal firms doing business with Russia were Vacuum Oil, International Harvester, Guaranty Trust, and New York Life, all firms controlled by the Morgan Rockefeller interests. Arthur Upham Pope's biography of Litvinov notes that in March 1921, a trade agreement was signed with Great Britain providing that gold sent in payment for machines bought by Russia would not be confiscated towards old debts or claims. This ensured that Russian gold sent to England would not be seized by his cousins, the British royal family. On July 7, 1922, Litvinov revealed that the Russian delegation at the Hague Conference was negotiating with an important group of financiers, which included Otto H. Kahn of Kuhn Loeb Company. A week later, Kahn arrived at The Hague. He stated, "The conference with the Russians will bring useful results and will lead to a closer approach to unity of views and policies on the part of England, France, and the U.S. in respect to the Russian situation." When Otto Kahn's wife visited Russia in 1936, she was treated like visiting royalty. In 1922, the Chase National Bank had established the American-Russian Chamber of Commerce to promote trade with and government recognition of Russia. Its chairman was Reeve Schley, a vice president of Chase. He was a director of many corporations including Howe Sound, Electric Boat, the Yale Corporation, chairman of Sundstrand and Underwood. He had served as director of the U.S. Fuel Administration from 1917 to 1919. His son, Reeve Schley Jr., was a captain in the OSS under General Donovan in World War II. Both Chase and Equitable Trust led in granting credits to the Soviet Union during the 1920s. In 1934, Roosevelt established the Export-Import Bank to finance increased trade with the Soviet Union. During World War II, Chase was principal bank in handling the many billions of dollars of lend-lease transactions for Russia. Roosevelt went all out in supporting the Soviets, perhaps because all three of his personal assistants, Alger Hiss, Lachlan Curry, and Harry Dexter White, were identified as Soviet agents. His mentor was Dean Acheson, formerly of J.P. Morgan Company. Assistant Secretary of State A. Burley Jr. testified before the House Un-American Activities Committee August 30, 1948, that Acheson was the head of the pro-Russian group in the State Department. Acheson later became senior partner of Covington and Burling, obtaining the position for the firm as Washington legal representative for 9 communist governments. On April 29, 1943, the Board of Economic Warfare granted a special license to Chemitar Corporation of New York to fill an order from the Soviet Purchasing Commission for 200 pounds, uranium oxide, 220 pounds, uranium nitrate, and 25 pounds of uranium metal, commodities virtually unknown at that time, thus launching the Soviet atomic program. Today, every American citizen lives under the threat of Soviet nuclear war. On January 29, 1944, Special Ambassador W. Avril Harriman in Moscow informed the State Department that we must turn over to the Russians the currency printing plates which had been engraved for the U.S. Treasury by Forbes Company of Boston. The State Department delayed action on this request for several weeks. On March 22, Harry Dexter White met with Gromyko at the Soviet embassy and assured him the plates would be delivered. Both Harriman and White made daily demands until the plates were turned over to the Soviet Union April 14, 1944. The Soviet Union then printed $300 million in currency, which was redeemed by the American taxpayers. After the Cold War began, the financiers continued their efforts to aid the Soviets. In 1967, the New York Times announced that a new consortium had been formed to promote trade with Russia, composed of Cyrus Eaton's Tower Corporation, Rockefeller's International Basic Economy Corporation, and N.M. Rothschild and Sons of London. Eaton had begun his career as a $2 a day factotum for John D. Rockefeller, who later financed his purchase of Canadian Gas and Electric Corporation. Eaton stated that Rockefeller soon interested him in Russian affairs. In an interview with Mike Wallace, Eaton claimed that under communism, the people of the Soviet Union were entirely contented. They were happy. I was amazed at their happiness and dedication to the system. Eaton was one of the first defenders of the Stalin-Hitler Pact in 1939. The Rothschilds have rarely been identified with communist causes, preferring to remain in the background. Only one member, N.M. Victor Rothschild, who served an apprenticeship with J.P. Morgan Company, had become involved with the Apostles' Club at Cambridge, described by Michael Straight as composed mostly of communists who were also homosexual. Its well-known members were Guy Burgess and Donald MacLean, Anthony Blunt, keeper of the Queen's Pictures, and the double or triple agent Kim Philby. During World War II, Victor Rothschild, who was with MI5, lent his London flat at No. 5 Bentinck St to Burgess, while his mother, Mrs. Charles Rothschild, hired Burgess as her investment counselor. Blunt left the staff of the Warburg Institute to work with MI5. He introduced Victor Rothschild to his aunt, Teresa Mayer, who later became Lady Rothschild. Blunt has been recently described as having had an affectionate relationship with the Queen. The Rockefeller family is sometimes called the first family of the Soviet Union. When Nelson Rockefeller was nominated for vice president in 1967, Pravda indignantly denounced his critics, saying that charges against Rockefeller were designed only to discredit him, and that the accusations came from ultra-right-wing organizations. Senator Frank Church, attending the 1971 Dartmouth Conference at Kiev, was amazed to find that David Rockefeller was treated like we would treat royalty in this country. The Russian people appear to evince an adoration of Rockefeller that is puzzling. David Rockefeller's plane lands in Russia, crowds line up to greet him at the airport, and line the streets of Moscow as his limousine passes, hailing him with cries of Rockefeller. George Gilder remarked that no one knows how to revere, blandish, and exalt a Rockefeller half, as well as the Marxists. After World War II, Dean Acheson frantically lobbied for an additional $300 million loan to the Soviet Union. Ed Burling, who was Frederick A. Delano's brother-in-law, had founded the firm of Covington and Burling, of which Acheson was partner, with Donald Hiss, brother of Alger. Acheson's lobbying failed to develop the Russian aid. The the Council on Foreign Relations drafted the Marshall Plan as an alternative measure. Their publication, Foreign Affairs, then published the Containment Plan as by George Kennan. The policy of containment, which has been the official foreign policy of the U.S. toward the Soviet Union since 1947, guarantees not only Soviet Russia's borders, but her continued enslavement of the captive nations which she holds by military force. Henry Luce, who always provided a forum for the international propagandists, reprinted the entire text of the July 1947 Foreign Affairs article in Life magazine, July 28, 1947. Its key sentence was, "The main element of any U.S. policy towards the Soviet Union must be the long-term, patient but firm and vigilant containment of Russian expansive tendencies." Luce's Time magazine dubbed Kennan America's senior policymaker. He later became a fellow of the Institute of Advanced Study of Princeton. Kennan was the nephew and namesake of the George Kennan, who operated as a Marxist agent for Jacob Schiff in Russia for many years before the Bolshevik Revolution, and was finally expelled by the Tsarist government. Kennan's pen name, X, was a favorite identification of socialist operatives. In 1902, the Socialist X Club had been founded in New York by John Dewey, whose socialist program has dominated American education during the 20th century. The other founders of the X Club were James T. Shotwell, founder of the League of Nations, United Nations, etc., Morris Hillquit, communist candidate for mayor of New York, Charles Edward Russell, and Rufus Weeks, vice president and managing director of New York Life, which was controlled by J.P. Morgan. Nikolai Khrushchev, dictator of the Soviet Union, came to New York September 17, 1959. He was invited to dinner at W. Averell Harriman's home. 30 people attended, who controlled aggregate wealth of $10 billion. They included Russian-born David Sarnoff, head of RCA, Philip Mosley of the Council on Foreign Relations, Herbert H. Lehman of Lehman Brothers, Dean Rusk of the Rockefeller Foundation, George A. Woods, First Boston Corporation, Thomas K. Finletter of Coudert Brothers, former Secretary of the Air Force, John K. Galbraith, economist, Frank Pace of General Dynamics. In September 1960, Khrushchev was entertained at Hyde Park at a dinner given in his honor by Eleanor Roosevelt. Present at this select gathering was Victor Hammer, who had fenced the Romanov jewels in the U.S. He sold many Faberge items to Lillian Pratt, wife of the General Motors tycoon. The collection is now in the Virginia Museum in Richmond, Virginia. In 1973, the U.S.-USSR Trade and Economic Council, consisting of leading U.S. heads of corporations, was formed to promote trade gifts to the Soviet Union. In 1976, G.M. Miller of Textron was named head of the council. Shortly afterwards, he was appointed chairman of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors by Carter. The Bolshevik Revolution, which was nurtured through its most trying days by three directors of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, William Boyce Thompson, George Foster Peabody, and William Woodward, continues to be supported by the Federal Reserve System. The Federal Reserve System maintains close ties with the Gosbank, the Soviet Central Bank, which controls the Communist Party of the USSR. Gosbank employs economists and is known as a passive rather than an active bank of issue, meaning that it follows orders from other sources, as does the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. The Gosbank Federal Reserve System cooperation in Soviet financial letters is handled through the Bank for International Settlements in Switzerland. In 1949, the present flood of Eurodollars originated as European deposits of communist dollar hoards in the Soviet Eurobank of Paris, Banque Commerciale pour Europe du Nord. The financiers then realized they created a new and even more untraceable source of paper money, which had no backing. Anthony Sampson writes that the more cosmopolitan banks with foreign experts and directors, such as Warburgs, Montagues, Rothschilds, and Kleinwarts, had also discovered a huge new source of profits in the market for Eurodollars. These profits now amount to some $2 trillion, all of which are obligations of the American taxpayer. This Ponzi operation was made possible by the exclusive Central Bankers Club, the Bank for International Settlements, which had been established by Hjalmar Schacht, financier of the Nazi movement, Emil Franke, guiding genius of Hoover's Belgian Relief Commission, and John Foster Dulles, heir to the title Most Dangerous Man in America. It was set up in May 1930 by the Hague Treaty to handle German reparations payments, which, of course, were never paid. BIS now controls 1/10 of the world's gold, which it rents out at a profit. Its assets have increased by an astronomical 1,200% in the past 20 years. U.S. shares of BS are held by Citibank. This audiobook was uploaded by Hidden Whispers Revelation on YouTube. Please subscribe and like the video to support this work if you enjoyed listening. American International Corporation continued to exercise a behind-the-scenes role in U.S.-Soviet dealings until World War II, when W. A. Harriman's presence in Moscow to direct Stalin's handling of the war usurped its duties. Standard & Poor's shows in 1982 an American International Group, an insurance holding company with $3.4 billion in assets, whose attorneys are Sullivan and Cromwell. It was formed from the Cornelius V. Starr Insurance Network, which was part of the CIA's Asiatic operations. Its directors include Harry Kearns, CHMN Eisenhower-Nixon presidential campaign, now CHMN American Asian Bank, served as President Export-Import Bank 1969-73. William L. Hemphill, President United Guarantee, Director of Cone Mills. The Hemphill family has been allied with J.P. Morgan for many years. Douglas MacArthur II, diplomat. John I. CHMN J. Henry Schroeder Bank, and Schroeder's Ltd. of London. Edwin A. Granville Mint Inn of England, who was chairman of American International from 1946 to 1979, now director of the Starr Foundation, and J. Milburn Smith, director of Lloyd's of London. Prominent American businessmen and political leaders such as W. Averell Harriman do not bother to conceal their pro-Soviet activities. Russian Ambassador Dobrynin casually referred to Henry Kissinger's double role, saying, "I am the laughing third man, sitting still. Kissinger is negotiating for us too." Brezhnev, dictator of Russia, was asked why the Soviet Union did not take a role in Middle East negotiations. He replied, "We don't need representation. Kissinger is our man in the Middle East." With this kind of influence, it seems odd that the communists do not precipitate a coup and seize absolute power in the U.S., as they did in Russia in 1917. There are answers to this question, not Americans, but guns held privately by American citizens. A confidential Ford Foundation study showed that only 5 to 10% of Americans would actively resist a communist seizure of power. This was the good news. The bad news was that only 1% of our citizens, armed and opposing the takeover, would defeat it. Since 1948, Americans have asked this writer when the communists will seize power in the U.S. The answer is that they will seize power after they have confiscated the guns. Guns are forbidden in the Soviet Union. Only the highest officials are allowed to possess them. Criminals understand only one law, the law of force. The criminal syndicalists who seek to enslave the entire world cannot be defeated by humility or compassion, but only by the most determined and the harshest measures. To examine the American situation in perspective, there are only 500 men, primarily in the major foundations, who are actively engaged in transmitting international banker socialist orders to our government. Beneath them are 10,000 politicians, businessmen, media personalities, and academicians who, with the aid of religious operatives, implement the orders from London. This is a much smaller number than the members of the Communist Party of the USSR, which rules the Soviet Union. To protect these traitors, the U.S. government has imported 25 million aliens into the United States, which includes 5,000 intensively trained terrorists and hardened criminals. This force is intended to neutralize the opposition of the American people to communism. The government encourages crime because it is the nationwide criminal force, not the police force, which keeps the population subdued. Americans must devote all their energies to defending themselves against the professional criminals, protecting their homes and families, leaving them no opportunity to organize against the criminal syndicalists of the world order. This clever plan of subsidizing the criminal element was the sole achievement of the Law Enforcement Administration, a foundation-organized plan which originated at the University of Chicago. The federal government uses its armed police, the IRS, the FBI, the BATF, and the CIA solely to terrorize its American subjects into compliance with the program of the world order. Most American citizens have had to come to the painful realization that the FBI is not concerned with fighting communism, but only with battling American anti-communists. They now realize that the IRS functions as an armed group of terrorists not to collect funds, of which the government has no need, but solely to extort money by force from American citizens as part of the program of the world order. The intent is to render them impoverished and terrorized, so that they will be rendered impotent and unable to organize to resist the world order. It is the program of 1984. Even if they planned otherwise, the five masters of the world order have now created a situation which must lead to world war, world economic, or both. The 30-year buildup of the Soviet Union as the next opponent in an ongoing world conflict was noted by Stully Blotnick in Forbes magazine, November 7, 1983. A wealthy New York lawyer whose portfolio contained substantial holdings of Douglas, Raytheon, and General Dynamics, commented, "It bothers me even to think what would happen if the Russians decided to take us up on our 5% a year solution to the arms race. Once we started dismantling our strategic weapons, the defense stocks will make the high-tech group look stable by comparison. The 60% loss I took on my Fortune computer system could be a hint of things to come. The world order has no religious, political, or economic program except world slavery. Only by subduing all potential opposition can the parasite guarantee his position of lodging on the host. The world order sets up countless groups to promote any type of idea, and then sets up other groups to fanatically oppose them. But the masters have no dedication to anything except slavery. As Ari McMaster wrote in The Reaper, the goal of international communism is not to destroy Western international debt capitalism. The goal of international communism is to enslave mankind at the behest of Western international debt capitalism. This is all you can ever know about the present world situation, and it is all you need to know. In law and finance, it is prudent to make up a worst-case theory. What is the worst-case theory we could apply to the U.S. economy today? It is not more inflation, higher debt and interest rates, or higher taxes. These are already inevitable. The worst case is a revolution in Russia. Let us suppose a truly terrifying scenario that the inmates of the Soviet concentration camps have been surreptitiously armed. They rise up and seize power in a coup which would be as impossible to stop as the Bolshevik coup of 1917. Americans would applaud if a patriotic Christian government which, like the Tsar's government, desired only peace with the U.S., suddenly seized power in Russia. Or would we? We could hardly applaud, because we would be too busy dodging the bodies falling from windows on Wall Street. Within hours, our defense-oriented stocks would collapse, down the entire market with them. As Blotnick barely hints, there would be a complete economic collapse in the United States. The fact is that the world order has made the economy of the U.S. entirely dependent on a threat from Russia. It could not survive a friendly regime. That is why the CIA, also known as the Central Investment Agency, cooperates with the KGB to create and destroy anti-communist groups around the world. The CIA has never engaged in sabotage in the Soviet Union. The KGB has never engaged in sabotage in the U.S. By betraying the anti-communist fighters at the Bay of Pigs, the CIA bolstered Castro's shaky regime and destroyed his opposition. He has never again faced any challenge. Former CIA official David Atlee Phillips says, page 107, the night watch, that Dean Rusk, Rockefeller Foundation, ordered the cancellation of the airstrike, which doomed the anti-communist forces at the Bay of Pigs to annihilation. Powers, in his biography of Richard Helms, also identifies Rusk as the man who canceled the air support of the anti-communists. Chapter 3. Franklin D. Roosevelt. The crash of 1929 and the resulting depression have been exhaustively covered in a previous work, Secrets of the Federal Reserve, 1983. Roosevelt was elected president in 1932 in a campaign which ignored Hoover's Rothschild connections and his World War I record. Instead, Roosevelt blamed Hoover for a depression which had been set up by the Bank of England. Hoover states in his memoirs, "In replying to Roosevelt's statement that I was responsible for the orgy of speculation, I considered for some time whether I should expose the responsibility of the Federal Reserve Board by its deliberate inflation policies from 1925 to 28 under European influence, and my opposition to these policies." Hoover remained silent and was ushered out of office. He later termed Gerard Swope's economic planning for the New Deal as the precise pattern of fascism. The New Dealers, by an unofficial observer, Literary Guild 1934, noted that the New Deal included W. A. Harriman, administrator in charge of heavy industry, and his sister, Mary Rumsey, who backed Newsweek with Vincent Astor, and the New Deal Weekly, Today. Observer also noted that Colonel House was the elder statesman behind the New Deal, and that House had only backed 2 presidential candidates and FDR. Roosevelt continued the Wilson policies, actually the House policies outlined in Philip Drew, Administrator, with the same personnel, and ended as Wilson did, by involving America in another world war. Observer states that Colonel House's New York apartment was only 2 blocks from the Roosevelt home on East 65th Street in New York, and that house was seen there almost every day in 1932. He also visited Roosevelt in New England and on the Roosevelt yacht. To consolidate Roosevelt's power, his backers used the typical world order scheme. They set up his opposition. In August 1934, the principal architects and financiers of his New Deal formed the Liberty League, immediately characterized as an extreme right-wing organization. Pierre and Irene DuPont put up $325,000 for it. The League was also financed by J.P. Morgan, the Rockefellers, J. Howard Pugh, and William J. Knudsen, who was later appointed by FDR to an important position. The backers of Liberty League, who were busily denouncing Roosevelt and his staff as communist, which many of them were also the organizers of American International Corporation, which had been formed to prevent the economy of the Soviet Union from collapsing. Liberty League successfully corralled the opponents of FDR and branded them as right-wing nuts. Roosevelt was given the opportunity to rant against his opposition as economic royalists, the old guard, and princes of privilege. Gerald L.K. Smith was then brought into the picture in order to smear Roosevelt's opposition as anti-Semitic. The ploy operated from 1934 to the 1936 elections, when it effectively destroyed Landon's campaign. No effective political opposition was organized against Roosevelt for the rest of his lifetime in office. It was one of the most successful political hoaxes in American history. Roosevelt then married his son to an heiress of the DuPont dynasty. At the very time that Eugene DuPont, cousin of Pierre, was one of the most active members of the Liberty League, F.D. Roosevelt Jr. was courting his daughter, Ethel. They were married June 28, 1937, in what Time magazine called the wedding of the year, presided over by Dr. Endicott Peabody. The couple made the cover of Time magazine, the only newlyweds ever to do so. These measures were necessary because FDR's backers were planning to involve the U.S. in the Second World War. Any popular political opposition to Roosevelt might have swept him out of office in 1940, just when he was needed to bring off the Pearl Harbor attack. On the morning of Pearl Harbor, General Marshall, his chief of staff, met secretly with Maxim Litvinov, married to Ivy Lowe of England, to assure the Russians that everything was going according to plan. Marshall later testified before Congress that he couldn't remember where he was on Pearl Harbor Day. The managed conflict was well on its way. Jacques Rueff points out that Schacht did not invent Hitler's monetary policy. It was imposed on Germany by American and British creditors to finance war preparations and finally unleash war itself, the sins of the West. Rueff also points out that the Standstill Agreement of 1931 allowing Germany a moratorium on war debts through the 1930s was an amicable pact between the London, New York, and German branches of the Warburg and Schroeder houses. Max Warburg remained Schacht's deputy at the Reichsbank until 1938. Kurt von Schroeder then became his deputy. Schacht's father had been Berlin agent for the Equitable Life Insurance Company of New York. The industrialist levies for Hitler, the Circle of Friends, were paid into the Schroeder Bank. Throughout the 1930s, Hitler was duped into persevering in his desire for friendship with England, an alliance originally proposed jointly by Theodore Roosevelt and the Kaiser in 1898 between the 3 Nordic powers, England, Germany, and the United States. The Schroeders assured Hitler that their Anglo-German fellowship in England was 100 times more influential than it actually was. With such figures as the Astors and the Chamberlains supporting rapport with Germany, Hitler was persuaded that war with England was impossible. In 1933, he had announced his discovery that Marx, Lenin, and Stalin had all said that before international communism could triumph, England and her empire must be destroyed. "I am willing to help defend the British Empire by force if called upon," he declared. In 1936, Hitler arranged for meetings to take place between English and German diplomats, but the desired result was never attained, as the British had only one goal: to lull Hitler into a sense of false security until they could declare war against him. To lure Hitler into World War II, it was necessary to guarantee him adequate supplies of such necessities as ball bearings and oil. Jacob Wallenberg of the Swedish Enskilda Bank, which controlled the giant SKF ball bearing plant, furnished ball bearings to the Nazis throughout the war. The anti-aircraft guns sending flak against American air crews turned on SKF ball bearings. Its American plant, SKF of Philadelphia, was repeatedly put on the proclaimed list, and each time, Dean Acheson removed it. President William S. Farish of Standard Oil refueled Nazi ships and submarines through stations in Spain and Latin America. When Queen Elizabeth recently came to the U.S., the only family she visited was the Farishes. Throughout the war, the British paid royalty to Ethel Standard Corporation on the gasoline used by German bombers who were destroying London. The money was placed in Farben bank accounts until after the war. IG Farben was organized by the Warburgs in 1925 as a merger between 6 giant German chemical companies: Badische Anilin, Bayer, Agfa, Hoechst, Weiler-Mir, and Grecium Elektron. Max Warburg was director of IG Farben, Germany, and IG Chemie, Switzerland. American IG Farben was controlled by his brother, Paul, architect of the Federal Reserve System, Walter Teagle of Standard Oil, and Charles Mitchell of National City Bank. Just before World War II broke out, Ethel Standard shipped 500 tons of ethyl lead to the Reich Air Ministry through IG Farben, with payments secured by letter of Brown Brothers Harriman dated September 21, 1938. Throughout World War II, the Paris branches of J.P. Morgan and Chase National Bank continued to do business as usual. At the end of the war, occupation authorities repeatedly issued orders to dismantle IG Farben plants, but were countermanded by General William Draper of Dillon Red, which had financed German rearmament, and the Churchill remarked of this managed conflict in 1945, just before it ended, "There never was a war more easy to stop." Quoted in Washington Post, June 11, 1984. The only real difficulty had been encountered in getting it started. Churchill succeeded in prolonging the war for at least a year by defeating General Wiedemeyer's plan for a channel crossing in 1943, and by embarking on his ruinous North African Sicilian swing, a replay of his disastrous Gallipoli campaign of the First World War. Life revealed April 9, 1951, that Eisenhower had radioed Stalin through the U.S. military mission in Moscow of his plan to stop at the Elbe and allow the Russians to take Berlin. The message had been written by Ike's political advisor, John Wheeler Bennett of RIA, received by W. Averell Harriman, and delivered to Stalin. In Washington, General Marshall assured President Truman that we were obligated to allow the Russians to take Berlin. Senator Joseph McCarthy later called Marshall a living lie. The conquered German people were now systematically looted and ruthlessly governed by the occupying powers. Henry Kissinger, John J. McCloy, son-in-law of a J.P. Morgan partner, Benjamin Buttonwieser, partner of Kuhn, Loeb and Company. His wife was Alger Hiss's lawyer at his trial for perjury, and other Rothschild operatives descended like locusts upon the prostrate nation. Aid to Soviet Russia continued under the guise of the Marshall Plan, a rerun of Hoover's Belgian Relief Commission in World War I. The Marshall Plan originated as a special study by David Rockefeller for the Council on Foreign Relations, Reconstruction of Western Europe, completed in 1947. It was retitled the Marshall Plan and advertised as a great contribution to democracy in Europe. Imperial Brain Trust Shoup. W. Averell Harriman was installed in the Rothschilds' Paris mansion, Hotel Talleyrand, as head of the Marshall Plan. The victorious Rothschilds consolidated their control of world monetary systems by the Bretton Woods Pact, a replica of the Charter of the Bank of England. It provided immunity from the judicial process, its archives inviolable and not subject to court or congressional inspection. No taxation could be levied on any security, dividend, or interest of the fund. All officers and personnel were immune from legal processes. The pact systematically looted Western Europe and the United States. On April 3, 1984, AP reported that British investments in the U.S. were now $115 billion, and the British held $28 billion in U.S. bank assets. At least one U.S. senator is a member of the British aristocracy, Malcolm Wallop, R. Wyoming, son of Honorable Oliver Wallop, whose brother is Earl of Portsmouth, created 1743. Senator Wallop's sister, Lady Porchester, married Lord Porchester, son of the Earl of Carnarvon. Lord Porchester is the Queen's Master of Horse and her racing manager. Lord Carrington, for many years British Foreign Minister, is now Henry Kissinger's partner in Kissinger Associates and was recently appointed head of NATO. He is CHMN of GE CHMN Australian New Zealand Bank, director of Rio Tinto, Barclays Bank, Cadbury Schweppes, Amalgamated Metal, British Metal, and Hambros Bank. His mother was the daughter of Viscount Colville, who was Financial Secretary of the Treasury 1936 to 38. Richard Davis notes in The English Rothschilds that Lionel Rothschild was a frequent visitor at Lord Carrington's house and, in fact, Lord Carrington was related to the Rothschild family by marriage. The first Lord Carrington was Archibald Primrose. His son became Viscount Rosebery. The fifth Earl Rosebery married Hannah Rothschild, daughter of Mayer, in 1878. She was given away by Disraeli. World War II delivered the peoples of the world into the hands of the world order, with the predictable result that they have been systematically despoiled, terrorized, oppressed, and massacred in further managed conflicts, not the least of which was the Vietnam War, in which American boys with little or no combat training were sent into battle against the highly trained guerrilla troops of Ho Chi Minh and General Giap, communist troops whose leaders had been intensively trained by the special OSS Deer Team. The Rothschilds rule the U.S. through their foundations, the Council on Foreign Relations, and the Federal Reserve System, with no serious challenges to their power. Expensive political campaigns are routinely conducted, with carefully screened candidates who are pledged to the program of the world order. Should they deviate from the program, they would have an accident, be framed on a sex charge, or indicted on some financial irregularity. Senator Moynihan stated in his book, Loyalties, A British Friend, Wise in the Ways of the World, put it thus: they are now on page 16 of the plan. Moynihan prudently did not ask what page 17 would bring. The American citizen works hard and pays taxes, blissfully unaware that at any moment the secret rulers, operating through the Federal Reserve Board, can make a monetary ruling which will place him in onerous debt or bankrupt him. Gary Allen writes in American Opinion, October 7, 1979, "Whatever the future holds, you can bet it will be unstable with wide swings in the value of the dollar and precious metals. As long as Volcker's sponsors know in advance what his policies will be, they will make big money." This accurate prediction was followed by 20% interest and 25% inflation. Businessweek, February 20th, 1984, stated, "The worst market for traders is a stable one." Investment banks now have a greater than ever vested interest in market instability. They can rack up enormous profits by guessing right about rapid, wide swings in profits, prices, and interest rates. It is obvious that they can rack up enormous profits if they know in advance what the monetary decisions will be. Anyone seriously believes that no one knows in advance what Federal Reserve decisions will be is too naive to be allowed out on their own. Anybody who believes that there is no one who can tell the Federal Reserve Board what its policies are to be is even more out of touch with reality. Many people believe that Lord Montague Norman ran the Bank of England as a one-man show for 30 years, showing that some people will believe anything. A. Craig Kopitas writes in Harper's, January 1984, How the Barbarians Do Business, about the 2,000 dealers of the London Metal Exchange, that viewing these people objectively, you are left with a simple scrap merchant, a rag-and-bone man, as the British call their junk. It is the rag-and-bone men who are running the economies of the world, moving prices up and down like a window shade, and profiting handsomely on every move of the markets. Carter Field notes in his biography of Baruch, Baruch got out of the market just before the crash. But what made Baruch sell stocks and buy tax-exempts at such a favorable time? Field offers no answer. Norman Dodd, who was then with Bankers Trust, states that Henry Morgenthau came into Bankers Trust a few days before the crash and ordered the officers to close out all securities of his trusts, $60 million, in 3 days. The officers tried to remonstrate with him, pointing out that if he would sell them over a period of weeks, he would make much greater profits, perhaps $5 million more than if they were disposed of on such short notice. Morgenthau became furious, screaming at them, "I didn't come here to argue with you. Do as I said." Black Friday occurred within the week. May 30th, 1936, Newsweek wrote about a Roosevelt appointee to the Federal Reserve Board, Ralph W. Morrison, He sold his Texas utility stock to Insull for $10 million, and in 1929 called a meeting and ordered his banks to close out all security loans by September 1st. As a result, they rode through the Depression with flying colors. The insiders come through with flying colors, while millions of victims are ruined, destroyed by forces which they refuse to believe exist. Heartbreak, losses of homes and businesses, breakdowns, suicides, destruction of families. These are the results of world order economic policies initiated and carried out by the rag and bone men. Through its monetary command to the Federal Reserve Board, the world order determines the outcome of American elections. A news commentator recently pointed out that Paul Volcker would determine whether Reagan would be reelected. In 1980, the Federal Reserve Board deliberately defeated Carter and elected Reagan. Otto Eckstein noted in U.S. News, September 5, 1983, that the prime rate reached 21.5% in late 1980, creating a recession in an election year. Eckstein, head of data resources in Lexington, Massachusetts, he later died suddenly, said, "The Federal Reserve had never before made such a move. Only the world order knows whether the Federal Reserve will ride Reagan back into office in 1984 on a high tide of prosperity or throw him out as the new Herbert Hoover. The more likely prospect is that he will be the Herbert Hoover of 1986 or 1988. One critic pointed out that Volcker has boosted interest rates, which hurts U.S. stocks, making short-term U.S. money instruments more desirable than long-term, and bringing about the very instability of foreign capital flows, which he claims to fear. Gordon Tether writes in the London Financial Times, "In all history, there can be fewer instances of a man having inflicted greater damage on the interests of his fellow human beings than Volcker has done with benign neglect, and its all too many malignant manifestations. Not the first of which is the ill-conceived gold demonetization campaign Washington has been engaged in since the late 60s. Interest rates rise when gold does not back currency. Through the London Gold Pool, the Federal Reserve System and the U.S. Treasury disposed of American gold at the giveaway price of $35 an ounce, 1/10 of its current value, robbing the American public of billions of dollars. On July 24, 1969, Volcker authorized SDR paper gold, special drawing rights, to replace gold in foreign exchange. He then triumphantly remarked to his fellow bankers in Paris, "Well, we got this thing launched." Secretary of the Treasury Connolly then took the Nixon administration off gold, devaluing the dollar in August 1971. On July 17, 1984, Jack Anderson described the Federal Open Market Committee in the Washington Post as a mysterious council of 12, the enigmatic group with excessive secrecy who, says Anderson, influence what rates you will pay, how much money will be available for business to borrow, and whether inflation once again will eat up your earnings and reduce the value of your bank accounts. Despite the far-reaching importance of Volcker's decisions, his testimony before Congress is shrouded in gobbledygook. This writer has gone through hundreds of pages of his testimony without finding a single quotable phrase about his economic intentions. July 9, 1984, Jack Anderson said of Volcker's meetings with high Treasury officials, one of them, asked if he could recall anything Volcker had said during the high-level meetings, thought a moment, and replied, "I can't remember anything he said that I understood." Senator Moynihan noted in the New Republic, December 31, 1983, "The Fed does not control the precise money supply and cannot precisely determine interest rates. But it can set the direction and range for both, and this it did. Anyone who tried to dissent was soundly wrapped. Its 24 or so central bankers decided to bust the economy, and bust it they did." Paul Craig Roberts writes in Business Week, February 27, 1984, "Whatever Volcker's intentions, the empirical data show that there has been a deceleration in money growth since last spring, and that the Fed has been using open market operations to keep interest rates up. What concerns the financial markets is the eclipse of Reagan's policies by Volcker's. The most likely result will be higher taxes and higher deficits. Nevertheless, the press and the Democrats attack Reagan as responsible for the deficit, over which he has no control, and which Volcker creates. The New York Times stated that whoever won the election in November 1984, it has already been decided that taxes will be increased by billion. Here again, why have an election of elected officials who have no influence in economic affairs? Brunner recently interviewed Walter Wriston, retired head of Citibank, who said, "I have been through the Fed's actions for the past 15 years in detail. The Fed has exercised a malign influence on the economy of this country. Its interference in the financial markets of America over the last decade has resulted in persistently excessive money growth, inflation which undermined the financial strength of U.S. corporations owing to the combined inflation and excessive rates of taxation, and record debt." Forbes pointed out June 20th, 1983 in a story about Tony Solomon. Solomon may be the most important man in the Federal Reserve System after the chairman, and what he says and does has an effect upon us all. Perhaps you have never heard of Tony Solomon. Certainly you have never voted him into any office. Yet what he says and does has an effect upon us all. He is the chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, a post formerly held by Paul Volcker. This bank represents the New York money market in the Federal Reserve System. 53% of its stock is held by 5 New York banks whose controlling influence is the London House of Rothschild. The chairman of the FRBNY sits permanently on the committee at the right hand of the chairman of the Board of Governors. Sector 12A of the 1913 Federal Reserve Act provided that 5 representatives of the 12 Federal Reserve banks should rotate on the FOMC. This was quietly amended in August 1943, while World War II was raging, to read, "One elected annually by the Board of Directors of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York," replacing the provision that one should be elected annually by the boards of directors of the Federal Reserve Banks of Boston and New York. FRBNY is now the only Federal Reserve Bank with a permanent seat on the FOMC. The American public was never informed of this change. Chapter 4. The Business of America. John Moody, author of many standard reference works on American finance, stated in Moody's magazine, August 1911, "The seven men in Wall Street now control a great share of the fundamental industry and resources of the United States. 3 of the 7 men, J.P. Morgan, James Stillman, and George F. Baker, head of the First National Bank of New York, belong to the so-called Morgan Group. 4 of them, John D. and William Rockefeller, James Stillman, head of the National City Bank, and Jacob H. Schiff of the private banking firm of Kuhn, Loeb Company, to the so-called Standard Oil National City Bank Group. The central machine of capital extends its control over the U.S. The process is not only economically logical, it is now practically automatic. What was true in 1911 is even more true in 1984. The 7 men are now, as then, merely American agents for London interests. In 1919, Moody wrote in Masters of Capital, "All of the great bankers began as dry goods traders, including Junius S. Morgan. B.B. Morgan was a dry goods house. J.M. Beebe Company of Boston made Junius S. Morgan a partner. Junius Morgan was later invited to join George Peabody and Company of London, which handled most of the House of Rothschilds trading in American stocks. Junius Morgan's son, J.P. Morgan, later changed the name of the firm to J.P. Morgan and Company, but it continued to one of 3 representatives of the House of Rothschild in the U.S., the others being Kuhn, Loeb and Company, and August Belmont. The Morgan Group and the National City Bank Group held a secret meeting at Jekyll Island, the week of November 22, 1910, to consolidate their financial power. Present were Senator Nelson Aldrich, his daughter married John D. Rockefeller Jr., his private secretary, Shelton A. Pyatt Andrews, Assistant, Section of the Treasury, Frank Vanderlip, President National City Bank, Henry P. Davison, J.P. Morgan's right-hand man, Charles D. Norton, President. First National Bank of New York, Benjamin Strong of Liberty Natal Bank. He later married the daughter of the President of Bankers Trust, became President of Bankers Trust, and Chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and Paul Warburg, a German immigrant who had joined Kuhn, Loeb and Company. Although these men were the most influential financiers in the U.S., they were present at Jekyll Island merely as the emissaries of Baron Alfred Rothschild, who had commissioned them to prepare legislation establishing a central bank in the U.S., modeled on the European fractional reserve central banking organizations of the Reichsbank, the Bank of England, and the Bank of France, all of which were controlled by the House of Rothschild. To enact the Federal Reserve Act into the law of the land, the bankers elected Woodrow president of the U.S. in 1912 by splitting the Republican Party, defeating the popular William Howard Taft by financing Theodore Roosevelt's malicious Bull Moose third-party candidacy. Wilson's academic career at Princeton had been financed by gifts from Cleveland H. Dodge, director of National City Bank, and Moses Taylor Pine, grandson and heir of the founder of National City Bank. Wilson then signed an agreement not to go to any other college. The Federal Reserve Act was legislated through Congress as the Glass-Owen Bill, backed by two Democrats, Congressman Carter Glass of Virginia and Senator Robert Owen of Oklahoma. Owen was persuaded to back the bill by Samuel Untermeyer, who had cultivated him while acting as counsel for the Pujo Money Trust investigation. Untermeyer flattered Owen by entertaining him at Greystone, his palatial Hudson River estate. Untermeyer claimed to be a progressive Democrat, although he lived in feudal splendor, employing 167 men to tend his expanse of orchids and greenhouses. At Greystone, Owen dined with Paul Warburg, Bernard Baruch, and other financiers who had been instructed to get the Federal Reserve Act passed. Owen, a former Indian agent who knew little about finance, was easily persuaded by Paul Warburg's doctrinaire pronunciamentos about our antiquated banking system, which must be brought up to par with the more modern banking system of Europe. After the Federal Reserve Act had been passed by Congress and signed into law by President Woodrow Wilson, 6 New York banks controlled by the Morgan Standard Oil Group bought controlling interest of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, which they have held ever since. The May 19, 1914 organization chart of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York shows that of the 203,053 shares issued, National City Bank took 30,000 shares. The Morgan Baker First National Bank took 15,000 shares. These two banks merged into the present Citibank in 1955, giving them 1/4 of the shares in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. The $134 billion Citicorp is now the largest bank in the U.S. The National Bank of Commerce, of which Paul Warburg was a large shareholder, took 21,000 shares. Hanover Bank, now Manufacturers Hanover, of which Lord Rothschild is a director, took 10,200 shares. Chase National Bank took 6,000 shares. Chemical Bank took 6,000 shares. These 6 banks in 1914 owned 40% of the stock of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. The Federal Reserve System printout of shareholders July 26, 1983 showed that they now own percentages as follows: Citibank 15%, Chase Manhattan 14%, Morgan Guaranty Trust 9%, Manufacturers Hanover 7%, Chemical Bank 8%. Citicorp, Citibank, is number 1 in size in the U.S. Number 3 is Chase Manhattan with $82 billion assets. Number 4 is Manufacturers Hanover, $64 billion. Number 5 is J.P. Morgan, $58 billion. Number 6 Chemical Bank. Number 11 is First Chicago, formerly First National Bank of Chicago, controlled by the Baker Morgan interests. House Report 159362, page 183. Notes: next to Baker & Son, Morgan & Company is the largest stockholder of First National of New York, owning 14,500 shares. Baker and Morgan together own 40,000 of the shares of First National Bank. The New York Times, September 3, 1914, at the time of the Federal Reserve stock was being sold, showed the principal stockholders of these banks as follows: National City Bank, 250,000 shares of which James Stillman owned 47,498, J.P. Morgan and Company 14,500, W. Rockefeller 10,000, MT 8267, Percy Pine 8267, J.D. Rockefeller 1750, J.S. Rockefeller 100, W.A. Rockefeller 10, J.P. Morgan Jr. 1,000. National Bank of Commerce, 250,000 shares, George F. Baker 10,000, J.P. Morgan Company 7,800, Mary W. Harriman, widow E.H. 5650, Paul Warburg 3,000, Jacob Schiff 100, J.P. Jr. 1,100. Chase Naval Bank, George F. Baker 13,408, Hanover Naval Bank, James Stillman 4,000, William Rockefeller 1540. During a period when thousands of U.S. banks have gone bankrupt since 1914, these banks, protected by their interest in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, have grown steadily. A Senate report, Interlocking Directorates Among the Major U.S. Corporations, a staff study of the Senate Committee on Governmental Affairs, June 15, 1978, shows that 5 of these aforementioned banks held a total of 470 interlocking directorates in the 130 major corporations of the U.S., an average of 3.6 directors major U.S. corporation. This massive report is of anyone's detailed study. We can only give the totals here. Citicorp, 97 company directorates. Chemical Bank, 99 directorates. Chase Manhattan, 96 directorates. Morgan Hanover, 89 directorates. Manufacturers Hanover, 89 directorates. Total, 470. This centralized control over American industry by 5 New York banks controlled from London suggests that instead of 130 major U.S. corporations, we may have only one, which in itself is an outpost of the London connection. In the early 19th century, the House of Rothschild established a number of affiliates in the U.S. which carried the code identification of city banks, or city companies, identifying them as originating in the financial center, the City of London. The Citibank was established in New York in 1812, in the same room in which the Bank of the United States had operated until its charter expired. Later called the National City Bank, its principal for 50 years was Moses Taylor, whose father had been a confidential agent for John Jacob Astor and British intelligence. Like the Morgan Peabody operation, Moses Taylor doubled his fortune in the Panic of 1837 by purchasing stock in the depressed market with capital advanced by N.M. Rothschild of London. During the Panic of 1857, while many of its competitors failed, Citibank prospered. Moses Taylor purchased the outstanding stock of Delaware-Lackawanna Railroad for $5 a share during the Panic. 7 years later, it was worth $240 a share. He was now worth $50 million. His son-in-law, Percy Pine, had come from London to work at Citibank and married Taylor's daughter. When Taylor died in 1882, he left $10 million. His son-in-law, now paralyzed, became president of the now National City Bank. John D. Rockefeller's brother William invested in the bank and persuaded Pine to step aside in 1891 in favor of James Stillman, Rockefeller's associate, to become president. James Stillman's son married Stillman's Elsie. His other son Percy married Stillman's daughter Isabel. James Stillman also had a London connection. His father, Don Carlos, had been a Rothschild agent in Brownsville, Texas, and a successful blockade runner during the Civil War. The National City Bank acquired several subsidiaries in New York, the National City Company, later renamed the City Company, and Citibank Farmers Trust Company. The dominance of the Morgan Kuhn Loeb financial power in New York is shown by a Dow Jones report in the New York Times February 11, 1928, that of total offerings of bonds in 1927, J.P. Morgan was first with National City Company was second with $435,616,000. Kuhn Loeb was third with on July 3, 1929. The New York Times noted that Charles A. Peabody had joined the boards of National City Company and Citibank Farmers Trust. On August 4, 1932, the New York Times stated that National City Bank would issue its own currency against U.S. bonds carrying the circulatory power under the new Federal Home Loan Bank Act, which empowered National City Bank to issue up to $124 million in currency. The National City Bank had now become a bank of issue, a function formerly reserved to central banks. On June 8, 1933, James H. Perkins, CHMN National City Bank, announced the National City Company would change its name to City Company of New York. On November 21, 1933, the National City Bank listed 31 affiliates including Citibank Farmers Trust, City Company of New York, City Company of Massachusetts, 44, Wall Street Company, and Cuban Sugar Plantations Incorporated. On March 3, 1934, the New York Times announced that National City Bank would sell the National Bank of Haiti, a wholly owned subsidiary, on April 29, 1934. The Times also noted that National City Bank had organized United Aircraft February 2, 1934, and that its subsidiary, Citibank Farmers Trust, had celebrated its 112th anniversary on February 28, 1929. On June 27, 1934, the City Company of New York was designated German bond scrip agent in the U.S. On May 22, 1933, City of New York announced its merger with Brown Brothers Harriman, with Joseph Ripley as chairman of the board. The company went through several name changes as Brown Harriman Company, Harriman Ripley, and is now Brown Brothers Harriman once more. On March 4, 1934, General Billy Mitchell, addressing the Foreign Policy Association, stated that National City Bank and its affiliates control aviation in this country. Allen W. Dulles, introduced as a specialist in international affairs, announced the profits of international munitions makers were unconscionable. On March 2, 1955, National City Bank announced it would purchase the stock of First National Bank for $165 million, $550 a share on the 1929 boom. First National sold for $38,600 share. Some market analysts believe the stock should have brought $750 a share in the 1955 sale, suggesting that the Baker family was no longer able to protect its interests. The resulting Citibank became the largest bank in the U.S., with a controlling interest in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. National City Bank had been in Hong Kong for 80 years. It has a $90 million Citibank Center there. In 1983, 4% of its annual profits came from the Hong Kong operation, which is the center of the world's drug trade. Besides its controlling interest in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, the Rothschilds had developed important financial interests in other parts of the United States. The House Banking and Currency Committee report May 1976, International Banking, page 60, identified the Rothschild 5 Arrows Group and its present 5 branches: N.M. Rothschild and Sons Limited, London; Banque Rothschild, France; Banque Lambert, Belgium; Newcourt Securities, New York; Pearson, Holdring and Company, Amsterdam. These 5 were combined in a single bank, Rothschild Intercontinental Bank Limited. The House Staff Report discloses that Rothschild Intercontinental Bank Limited has 3 principal American subsidiaries: National City Bank of Cleveland, First City National Bank of Houston, First City Bancorp, and Seattle First National Bank. These Rothschild subsidiaries were ranked in 1983 as follows: First City Bancorp Houston, 23rd in size in U.S., $17 billion assets; National City Corporation of Cleveland, 48th largest in U.S., $6.5 billion assets. National City Corporation of Cleveland has exercised a dominant role in Midwestern industry and politics for many years. First City Bancorp dominates Texas oil and heavy industry, as well as Texas politics. In 1900, Cleveland was the home of Marcus Alonzo Hanna, known as Mark, the legendary political boss of the Republican Party. He twice nominated and elected an Ohio Congressman, William McKinley, to the presidency of the U.S. He initiated the checkoff system by which banks and corporations were required to make regular political contributions. Hanna founded companies, M.A. Hanna Company and Hanna Mining Company, which acquired large steel and iron holdings. In 1953, President Eisenhower named George Humphrey Secretary of the Treasury. Humphrey, president of M.A. Hanna Company, was also CHMN National Steel Company, recently acquired by Nippon Koken, a Japanese concern. Director of Sun Life Assurance Company, Rothschild, Industrial Rayon Corporation, the world's largest manufacturer of auto tire cord, L.L. Strauss of Kuhn, Loeb Company controlled the firm. Harry Ball Jr. was also a director. Humphrey was also a director of the National City Bank of Cleveland. Other directors of this bank were C.T. Foster, CHMN Standard Oil of Ohio; J. Green, CHMN Ohio Telephone Company; L.L. White, CHMN Chicago and St. Louis RWY; R.A. Weaver, CHMN Faygo Corporation; J.B. Ward, President Addressograph Company; H.B. Klein, President Industrial Rayon Corporation; and William McAfee, Director Standard Oil. National City Bank of Cleveland now has $6.5 billion assets, 8,171 employees, and 17 companies. It recently purchased the $500 million Revenues Bank. In 1978, George Humphrey's son, Gilbert W., was CHMN Hanna Mining Company, Director National City Bank of Cleveland, Sun Life Assurance, National Steel, Massey Ferguson, General Reinsurance, and St. John Del Rey Mining Company. M.A. Hanna Company, the holding company, was liquidated in 1965 and its million assets distributed to its stockholders. The National City Bank of Cleveland's influence was not limited to the Hanna and Humphrey families. As the Ohio connection of the House of Rothschild, it guided the careers of 2 of the nation's best-known families, the Tafts and the Rockefellers. The bank financed the Taft family's activities in politics and business, the Taft Broadcasting Company, and other firms. John D. Rockefeller's success began when he obtained the backing of the National City Bank of Cleveland to finance his takeover of his competitors in the oil business. Because J.P. Morgan and Kuhn, Loeb Company controlled 95% of all railway mileage in the U.S. in the latter half of the 19th century, they offered Rockefeller special rebates on shipping oil through his holding company, South Improvement Company. This enabled him to undersell and ruin his competitors. One of them was a Mr. Tarbell, whose daughter, Ida Tarbell, later wrote the first expose of Standard Oil and was termed a muckraker by Theodore Roosevelt, a term which promptly went into the language. The entire Rockefeller empire was financed by the Rothschilds. Lincoln Steffens became a Wall Street reporter. He interviewed both J.P. Morgan and John D. Rockefeller on several occasions. He soon realized that these gentlemen, powerful though they were mere front men. He noted that no one ever seems to ask the question, who was behind the Morgans and the Rockefellers? No one else ever asked the question, nor did anyone answer it. Steffens knew the money for their operations was coming from someone else, but never managed to trace it. In February 1930, one of the few articles on the Rothschilds ever to appear in an American magazine appeared in Fortune, which stated, "Only one important point did the Rothschilds guess wrong. They never would have anything to do with the U.S. of America." Imagination falters at what the Rothschilds might be today if they had spent on the infant industries of this country one-half the sums they poured into Imperial Austria. The Fortune writer did not know then, and probably never knew, that the Rothschilds have always controlled the Morgan and Rockefeller operations, as well as the foundations set up by these front men to control the people of the United States. During the past quarter of a century, many writers have published alarming exposes of the Rockefellers and their control of the U.S. through the Council on Foreign Relations. In 1950, the New York Times carried a small notice on an inside page that L.L. Strauss, a partner of Kuhn, Loeb Company, had been appointed financial advisor to the Rockefeller brothers. In short, all their investments must be approved by a partner of Kuhn, Loeb Company. It has always been thus, beginning with Jacob Schiff. Strauss held the position from 1950 to 1953, when it passed to J. Richardson Dilworth. Dilworth, who married Elizabeth Cushing, was a partner of Kuhn, Loeb Company from 1946 to 1958, when he became director of finances for the entire Rockefeller family, presiding over all their accounts on the 56th floor of Rockefeller Center. He held the position until 1981. He is now chairman of the board of Rockefeller Center, director of International Basic Economy Corporation, Chrysler, R.H. Macy, Colonial Williamsburg, and Rockefeller University. The National City Bank of Cleveland continues to dominate Midwestern industry and politics. For many years, its primary law firm has been Jones, Day, Revis, and Pogue of Cleveland. The Washington Post announced December 19, 1983 that this law firm was spending $5 million for office space in Washington to house a staff of 60 lawyers, making this Cleveland law firm one of the most potent lobbying groups in Washington. Hanna Mining Company, despite relatively modest revenues of $333 million, exercises an important role, as shown by its board of directors, including such distinguished names as Herbert Hoover Jr., Under Secretary of State under Eisenhower and Dulles, Stephen D. Bechtel, CHMN of Bechtel Group and director of J.P. Morgan Company, K.L. Ireland of Brown Brothers Harriman, George F. Bennett, treasurer of Harvard University, and Nathan W. Pearson, financial manager of the Mellon family. Despite the Hollywood image of red-faced Texas oil millionaires driving new Cadillacs, the Texan oil industry has for years been dominated by the London Rothschilds through the billion-dollar First City National Bank of Houston and its 57 subsidiary Texas banks. Chairman of First City is James Anderson Elkins Jr., who is a director of Hill Samuel Company of London, one of the 17 merchant banks chartered by the Bank of England. His father was chairman of First City and founded the Texas law firm of Vinson and Elkins, the primary law firm of First City Bank. This firm dominated national politics through its most well-known partner, John B. Connolly, who achieved a reputation as kingmaker in Texas politics. He began as administrative assistant to Congressman Lyndon B. Johnson in 1949, then became attorney for the oil millionaire Sid Richardson, and Perry Bass, 1952-61, Secretary of the Navy 1961, Governor of Texas 1963-69, Secretary of the Treasury 1971-72. He was wounded in the Kennedy assassination in Dallas. He is now trustee of the Andrew Mellon Foundation, serves on the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, and the Advisory Committee on Reforming the International Monetary System. He advised Nixon on devaluing the dollar and going off the gold standard in 1971. He is now director of Superior Oil and Falconbridge Nickel Mines Limited. James Anderson Elkins is also director of Freeport Minerals, whose directors include some of the leading names in American business. CHMN of Freeport is Benno H. Schmidt, managing director of J.H. Whitney Company. Schmidt, who married into the wealthy Fleischman family, New Yorker magazine, etc., graduated from Harvard Law in 1941, became general counselor of the War Production Board in Washington 1941-42, and headed the Foreign Liquidation Commission 1945-46, which disposed of billions of dollars worth of property. He is also director of CBS and Schlumberger, the huge oil field service firm who began business in 1928 when it was awarded its first contract by the Soviet Union. It is said to have important Anglo-Swiss intelligence connections. Other directors of Freeport Minerals are William McChesney Martin Jr., chairman of the Federal Reserve Board 1951-1970, now director of J.P. Morgan U.S. Steel, Eli Lilly, General Foods, Royal Dutch Shell, IBM, American Express, Riggs National Bank, and Scandinavian Securities, the Wallenberg firm, Donald S. Perkins of Morgan Guaranty Trust, Time Magazine, John B. Madden, partner Brown Brothers Harriman, Godfrey S. Rockefeller, Norborn Berkeley Jr., director Uniroyal, and Anglo Energy Limited. Other directors of First City Bank Corporation include N. Armstrong, U.S. Ambassador to Britain 1976-77, co-CHMN Reagan-Bush Campaign 1980, Director of General Foods, General Motors, Trustee Hoover Institution, Guggenheim Foundation, Atlantic Council, Council on Foreign Relations, Halliburton Company, George R. Brown, Director of Halliburton. He founded the huge contracting firm, Brown and Root, which financed Lyndon B. Johnson's political campaigns, subsequently receiving billion-dollar contracts to construct naval bases and airfields in Vietnam, which are now being used by the Soviet Navy and Air Force. Brown married into the Pratt family, founded Texas Eastern an oil firm, and is director of ITT, NXDA, and the Brown Foundation. The Brown-Johnson Association began in 1940, when Johnson secured a lucrative contract for Brown and Root to build a large naval base at Corpus Christi, Texas. It was said then that any course chosen by Johnson would be paved by money from Brown and Root. J. Evitz Haley pointed out that Brown and Root prospered on government contracts after Johnson helped them and rapidly became a worldwide operation. In 1940, the Internal Revenue Service found that large contributions given to Johnson by Brown and Root and its subsidiary, Victoria Gravel Company, as much as each, were taken by Brown and Root as tax deductions. Haley states, Brown and Root were in control of Texas politics, that L.B. Johnson was in control of IRS, that records had been burned at IRS to get Brown off the hook in 1954. Johnson and Connolly then picked up a government plant for a small sum, which became a giant wartime contractor, the Sid Richardson Carbon Plant at Odessa, Texas, in which Mrs. Lyndon B. Johnson had a 1/4 interest. In 1955, Johnson suffered a major heart attack on his way to George Brown's palatial Middleburg, Virginia estate. This audiobook was uploaded by Hidden Whispers Revelation on YouTube. Please subscribe and like the video to support this work if you enjoyed listening.